Hello, hello. Okay, so, oh man, I wish I had a bit more time to prepare for this, but I think I have most of the things down. Okay, so greetings, lab rats. Today I wanted to stream a bit of what I would consider to be like my take on a beginner's tutorial for Puzzle and Dragons. So today's agenda is basically just gonna be all about a starter guide on how to get started with the game. There are some topics that I might not talk about. If you'd like for me to expand on them, then please feel free to let me know. But I'll quickly go over what's going to be covered in today. But for the time being, this guide is going to be focused for players that are starting during the Monogatari event. So not everything that I say in this event, that I say in the stream might be relevant for a future event, because there are some differences in what new players might get in their inboxes. But for the most part, I think a lot of the things that I mentioned in this should be relevant for the coming months, even though the strategies might be a little bit different. Okay, so I did do a stream about my Monogatari review gacha and a little brief guide about the Rising Sun tournament on Monday. If you'd like to check that out, then the video is on my YouTube channel. So yeah, feel free to leave questions in the comments section on the YouTube video for a potential part 2 Q&A, and with that, I will jump straight into the next section. So just to begin with, so today's topics that are being covered are app availability, like where you can play this game, where you can find it, new players, in-game resources, basically what you get when you first open up the game, how much does it cost for the full experience, because I know because it is a gacha game, a lot of people will be concerned if you're gonna have to empty your bank to have a bit of fun, but I'll get more into that later. How to understand what units do, so I'll be going over each part of what a monster's card looks like and what every section means. How do I improve units? So how do I bring my unit to its fullest potential? How do I improve my teams? So for some basic guidelines on how to throw together your first couple of teams. Should I grind ranks? I'll be giving my personal opinion on this topic. My box space is getting full. What can I sell? What do I do with X? Where I'll be going over the basic resources in this game and where you can find them and where you can use them. And for the last section, I'll go over trading and what that means for you and how you can do it with other players. Now I'll be weaving Monogatari collab details into the guide throughout the video. This is because Monogatari collab details aren't going to be relevant for future, for people that are viewing this with like 2 weeks from now. Like even the Rising Sun tournament tips that I'm going to be giving out aren't going to be relevant within a week. So I'll be weaving them in throughout the guide, and that's why I won't be listing them as their own specific sections under this topic covered. So moving on to the next section, app availability. So this guide is going to be focused on the NA region, and all the other regions have slight regional differences. It is recommended to just play on your native region or the Japanese server, as they get their content first and it trickles down to the other regions. This being said, EU players will not be able to play on their own region because the server actually got shut down. I say not too long ago, but I'm pretty sure it's been at least a year, or maybe it's been 2. I'm not sure. Time flies right now. So EU players will need to download the PadNA APK. Please be careful of where you download it. Always be sure to download your APK files from trustworthy sources. You don't want to get your phone hacked. It contains a lot more valuable information than you might think. So about the regional differences, NA, people used to always complain that NA got the short end of the stick. But to be honest, it's more like JP just gets the best end of the stick every single time. But it is their native region. The reason why NA considered like a second tier region before was because the rewards that we got weren't always up to par with whatever JP got. We would sometimes get different rewards that are a little bit worse off than it might have been before. 1 second. But that usually isn't the case right now. for most of the rewards that JP gets, we usually get them within a 2 to 3 month difference. All the core gameplay mechanics do trickle down to NA and all the other regions as well within that time frame. The only thing that I would like to mention here is the fact that JP might get collabs that NA or the other regions might not. This is because of licensing issues. So if you want to get everything and you want to be like at the cutting edge of pad technology, whatever it may be, or any like new content features and stuff like that, then you might want to try exploring the JP server after you get a decent foothold on the NA server and just, not even NA server, just in your native region, and you get a little bit more confidence in basically what all the UI buttons do, how to build a team, and such stuff like that. If you're already a native speaker and or if you can already read Japanese, it is possible that you could just start off on that server. Though because we are getting content on like a 2 to 3 month delay from Japan, it does technically make it easier for us to build our own teams because we can, or build our own teams or save our magic stones because we know what's going to come in the future. Though that does come with a caveat as well because, like I said, we don't get all the collabs. But that is just something that you're going to have to gamble with. Do note that while the core gameplay content is available for everyone, the JP server is collabs that may not make it to other regions due to licensing regions issues. That being said, we get glimpses into the future, so we know what we should save for, and that is our advantage. So moving on into the next section, new player resources, going over login rewards. Okay, for this section, I'm just gonna quickly switch over into. I'm gonna switch into my other pad account. Hold on 1 second. So for anyone that's watching the stream right now, if you have any questions about what I just mentioned, feel free to just let me know. It'll just take 1 second while I set this thing up. Okay, so this is the separate alt account that I made specifically for the stream. I'll go over what kind of contents it cleared afterwards, but for now I just want to go over the new player resources. So the moment you log in the first place, you're gonna get a 6-star fest exchangeable metal, 100 magic stones. This is something that trickled down from the JP 9th anniversary event. So this 100 stone bonus isn't for everyone that may be watching in after this anniversary event ends. Though that being said, Puzzle & Dragons actually does have frequent events where new players, while they typically start off with 50 extra magic stones, we do have events where new players might end up with 100 extra magic stones after clearing the tutorial. And those are typically times that overlap with some really strong gachas, like Godfests, which are basically just enhanced rate events from other gachas as well. So you get those stones. You also get 1 daily stone for logging in. Oh, this is the 50 daily stones for completing the tutorial. And then everything else up top is basically what you get for clearing the story mode, which I'll go into later. So basically, once you log in, you basically end up getting 1 6-star Godfest, 1 6-star Fest exchangeable material, and 150 magic stones. So about the 6-star exchange material, metal, I keep saying material, metal. Over here, this is basically a list of all the monsters that you can trade for. This is gonna change next week. The full details of what can be exchanged can be found on the next on the Puzzle & Dragons news site, which I'll be linking later on in the video. But for most people, I say just hold off on using this for now. But if you have absolutely no choice, then you might want to pick up an A. An A or possibly a sheet, but I don't want to make hard recommendations right now because it really depends on what kind of units you roll at the start. Because in Puzzle & Dragons, you can't really have one unit that just carries everything. This isn't really that kind of game. So you're going to want to pick a unit that basically matches whatever other roles you have until now. So I just say just hold off on using the metal and just sit on the decision for a little while. So Cling Tutorial gives you 50 stones, JP Anniversary gives you 100 stones, Story Mode Rewards gives you 100 stones, 1000 Tamadras, 3000 pluses, and Powerful Evos of story units. I'll go more into this later, but just know that this is quite the stimulus bonus for new players. Without this, this guide would not run as smooth. You also get an extra 63 stones for each chapter of the story you clear. Your max stamina will grow with your rank as you go through the story mode, provided you don't fail a stage. So about story mode is, it's going to be this tab in the corner. The second option, it says story on there. And there's basically 3 chapters of lore for you to explore. And each of them basically have like 20-ish floors. You'll be unlocking them in order. I'm not going to go into the specifics of what the lores are because I don't want to spoil anything. But in terms of rewards that you get for clearing it, I would highly, highly recommend that you clear the story mode as one of the first things that you do on your Fresh Pad account. Because this gives you another injection of approximately, like, I think it's 166 stones. 163 stones, I think. Yeah, for clearing the Sonia chapter, you get 100 extra stones. And for each of these chapters that you clear and go through, including the epilogue and the prologue, you'll get an extra stone each, so that includes 63 extra stones, which is a huge amount to be given for a new player, to be honest. And another good thing about the story mode is you don't need to bring in your own team, so there's there's no team building on your part, so you can just focus on just puzzling and just getting your hands dirty with the core gameplay elements of the gameplay elements. Your max stamina will grow with your rank as you go through the story mode, provided you don't fail a stage. Okay, so the story mode, the way it works is, for each stage that you clear, you can see the stamina cost on the left hand side. It actually goes up every dungeon that you encounter. And as a new player, your stamina is going to be significantly less than 50. But the benefit of running this story mode dungeon is because it gives you enough EXP for ranking up. And because your max stamina goes up with your rank, the Sonia chapter is actually designed so that if you start from rank 20, you can get to the end and you will have over 50 stamina, and you will be able to basically just you will have over 50 stamina, so you're set up for running most of the dungeons in this game. The other major stamina milestones are going to be 100 stamina and 200, but you'll unlock those at a later time. And for most players, they won't be like, you won't really have teams for most of the 100 stamina dungeons until you get pretty damn close to the point where you unlock it, so it's something you don't really have to worry about. And on this account, all I've done is basically just go through the story modes, and I've also done a little bit of rank grinding with the ranking dungeons, but that's a point that I'll bring up later. So yeah, if you fall short on EXP to rank up, you can continue clearing normal stages and or run the ranking dungeon, which gives 40,000 rank EXP at 25 stamina per run. It's pretty hard to fail the ranking dungeon, so if you just need the EXP, that's one option you can do. But for most players, I would recommend going through the normal dungeons and just clearing as far as you can in the first place, because it costs 0 stamina for both normal and technical dungeons. One thing to note is that it can feel like a little bit of a grind, but do note that you do get free stones for basically each of these rectangles that you finish, like each of the sub dungeons. Yeah, each of these rectangles. If you finish all the stages within the dungeon, you will get a stone for the clear. This also applies to the other event stages as well. So if you clear this rectangle and like you finish all the dungeons within the Monogatari series, you will also get an extra stone, and so on and so forth. So try to minimize your stamina wastage, is my recommendation. If you want, you can run some dungeons on the side, such as the Wednesday dungeon or Sapphire Dragon Metal Infestation. Things like that just to squeeze out a little bit of extra resources while you still can. Because right now it's going to be a stage where you are basically bombarded with rank ups and you really don't want to waste it. So as another part of player resources, Puzzle and Dragons actually has a feature where you can get maximum box space. So you start off with 200 box space at the beginning, and for every video that you watch, you can increase it by 1. If you want to increase it without watching a video, then it will cost you 1 stone for 5 spaces. So if you want to basically save your premium currency, your magic stones, then it is highly advisable that you watch your that you increase your box space through videos twice a day. So there is a hard limit of twice a day. It does reset in the morning and in the evening. I believe it's 7 a.m. EST and 7 it's like 7 a.m. EST and 7 p.m. EST, I think, or like 4 p.m. and 4 a.m. PST. And another way that you can watch a video is to restore your stamina. So long as your stamina is less than full, you can restore stamina by watching a video. And it basically gives you the stamina's bar worth of stamina as extra on top. It can overflow. It will be represented with a red bar. So you don't have to worry about that. Do note that if you rank up with overflowing stamina, you will not get extra. So make sure that you don't use your stamina refreshers before you rank up. And also another thing to take note is restoring stamina can also be done for 1 magic stone, though it is not recommended that you do that at the early stages because your max stamina is so low. If you want to restore your stamina, then I'd say you should wait until at least you have around 200 stamina. But yeah, it's mostly preference, but you know, you want to squeeze the most value out of your magic stones because it's not cheap. And even though you get 300 stones at the very start through the event tutorial and clearing the story dungeons, it is not a representation of how much freebies you're going to get. So it is best to be careful with how you spend your magic stones. So save your stones for important collabs and godfests. Godfests are basically Puzzle and Dragons' way of showcasing raid ups. There are monsters called Godfest exclusives, which aren't in the normal rare egg machine. Before I keep going, I want to say please do not roll in the rare egg machine. You want to save all your stones for Godfests. And those monsters are typically... Like, I don't want to say that you'll know it when you see it, but they're typically of a higher rarity. When you get them, they might be animated. Those are 2 signs that it's a Godfest exclusive. The lower and older tier Godfest exclusives aren't animated right off the get-go, but it doesn't really matter because one thing that I have to drill into everyone is to do not sell anything from the rem. So basically anything that you spend magic stones on, you do not want to sell at all. So if anything, please just use a stone to expand your box space if you're going on a rolling spree. Monsters often get buffs and updates and new evolutions down the line, so it's best if you just hold on to as many copies of something as you possibly can. I'm not exaggerating because I actually have like 10 copies of certain monsters and I'm still hesitant to sell off any of them. Because even in the worst case scenario where 1 roll costs 5 stones, which is only something that happens with really old collabs, typically it's like 7 to 10 stones per roll. Even in that case, you know, spending 1 stone out of 25 is like a 4% tax. Like, that's fine, in my opinion. Or in the most common case, if you're gonna try to roll in Godfests, which typically tend to cost 10 stones per roll, it's only a 2% tax for you to not have to worry about box space. I think that's a fair trade-off. So please do not sell anything from the rem. Your cards will most likely get updated, and once they do, they might fill a new niche that you didn't think that you needed, or they might be a straight upgrade to something that's already in your team that you might not have known. So yeah, non-NIAP players won't need to worry about buying box space if they stick to a routine where they watch 2 videos a day. This is because the pace in which you get your magic stones is going to be significantly outpaced by the amount of box space that you get. You can also run a short dungeon to watch a video to have almost double your stamina ready for your next game session if you've been busy all day. So what I mean by this is, if let's say you have your max stamina like this and you don't really have time to run a dungeon, or not to run a dungeon, but to like just burn off all your stam. Like maybe you just forgot about the game and then you just decide to check up on it just before you go to bed. Well, in that case, you can run a simple dungeon like the daily dungeon. There is a dungeon that costs like 10 stamina per, and it gives you like a P, which is a skillet material, and a free magic stone. So you can just run that and then watch a video to end off the day. And you're gonna be back tomorrow with like 76 plus 60 stamina at your disposal. And because the video refresh thing expires, it doesn't carry over. By carry over, it means like just because your account is 5 days old doesn't mean you can watch 5 videos in a row and then just bank on them. No, you have a limit of 1 per day, so it's best if you don't waste it. Rerolling is optional. Teams require 10 cards anyways, and most of the units that we get currently can be used to steamroll the older content, which opens up arenas for you. I'll go into what arenas are in a little bit, but yeah, because each of the teams require 10 cards, so 5 cards as a base, and 5 cards that go on top of them as assists. I wouldn't really recommend re-rolling, but there are certain guidelines which are specific to Monogatari, which I will get into a little bit. Let me try to... Okay, yeah. So I'll go over that in a couple of minutes. But reroll for the characters that you want, but don't worry too much about it. Pet is generous with stones and events. It's not so generous that you'll get like 300 stones like every month or something like that, but you know, it is generous enough where you won't be too much in a hole if you just decide to do a random YOLO roll once in a while. Provided that the thing that you're rolling for is filled with, like, the rem is filled with other valuables. But specific to this Monogatari collab, you can roll for the characters that you want, because there's a good chance that you came to this game because of the Monogatari collab. So I'd say, yeah, if you're interested in a certain character, then feel free to roll for it. Though I will give a little bit of a brief overview on what characters to roll for if you like the series and care a little bit more about what a potential unit, more valuable units in the series. Talking is hard. So moving on to point number 3. So that section that I just covered was basically all the in-game rewards that you get from the start and some various resources that you can use as a new player. In-game resources is what I meant to say. I did also mention the news section if you want to... Yeah, there's a news tab at the very top besides the LTD limited time dungeon schedule and the achievement section. You do want to check out news for the latest... Well, news, you know? Okay, so how much does it cost to get the full experience? So there are multiple tiers in which you can spend money, and there is no one right answer to this. Though I will say right now that the game is perfectly playable even if you spend $0 on the game. Excuse me. So $0 NIAP, non-IAP is viable with the rate at which we get stones and events now. And there are also some people that decide to challenge themselves specifically with by trying to clear as much of the game's content as possible by using nothing from the rare egg machines. Basically the gachas that require stones to use. This kind of a challenge is not recommended for beginners until they have significantly more game knowledge, because team building becomes significantly harder. There are various quote-unquote rules you can apply to this, though this is like more of an unofficial challenge, so it really depends on you. Some people decide to just not use friend leaders, which have rem units in them as well. Some people say that that's fair game because you yourself are not using rem units, and then using friends is like a feature that's built into the game. So it really depends on how much you want to challenge yourself, but for beginners I would recommend against it. Just because you might not know how to flesh out a team with just farmable units, because yeah, you get a lot less options and sometimes it can get pretty messy. And there's a good chance that you might have to just build your team around specific dungeons. Even for teams that... even for dungeons that normal rem teams might be able to just sweep by just entering blind. Yeah. So basically, it gets harder. Be wary. It is not recommended for beginners. Blah, 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 blah. So there's another tier of VIP where you spend basically up to like, I don't know, like $10 a month ish. Not even $10, but it's like $2 a month because events typically rotate on a schedule where we get an event for 2 weeks, and then we usually get something like a 1 week break where we get more pad focused events. And then we usually get like another collab to follow up on that. So it basically goes on like a somewhat of a 3-week cycle. This isn't always the case. Sometimes we do get back-to-back collabs, or sometimes we might go for a dry spell where we just end up with no collabs for like 2 or 3 weeks. But those kind of quote-unquote dry spells are more for anniversary-esque events where we get a lot more goodies and we have more things to focus on in-game. So we usually don't have to worry about that. And it's not only collabs, but we also have seasonal rems for events like Halloween, Christmas, back to school, stuff like that. Those kinds of things are using assets that are from Pad itself, their original artwork and characters. And for that kind of things, it is guaranteed to make it over onto the other regions. So that's one thing that you can plan around. And whenever these events come around for 2 weeks, during the duration, you can usually spend $1 to get an extra roll. Or the price might be $2 for some of the more expensive rems. But yeah, for approximately $2 to $3 a month, you can get an extra roll. It is, this level of IAP is probably the most bang for your buck. And there are also sometimes $5 10 stone bundles that are available. These things typically come around like once or twice a year. Like, they're not common. They usually coincide with like anniversary events and other big pad milestones and such. So that's another way you could yeah, so that's another way that you could get some free rolls. Well, it's not really free, but that's discounted rolls and some cheap stones for your use. And oftentimes, I just want to say that the $5 10 stone bundles they usually don't have an expiry date, and they usually go until the next time it resets. So if you are ever in a pinch where you might want to, where you're kind of like short on stamina and you might need to burn a couple of refreshes, the $5 option might be available for you during your times. I don't want to say darkest times because it's a freaking mobile game, man. But yeah. So there are extra collab and event rolls. Yeah, those things really add up over time. Or you might just be able to get really lucky and you get like a meta-defining card for like $1 or $2. You're gonna see people that roll those kind of things like everywhere if you hang around in forums and discords and whatnot. But you know, maybe you could be one of those guys. Who knows? So that is pretty much covering the $0 to approximately $3 per month tier. The next tier that I'm going to cover is basically Pad Pass. What Pad Pass is, it's this ginormous button at the top. It says Pad Pass. I am not a minor. So there's a whole bunch of things that you get for Pad Pass. But mainly, the main reason why people get this is because of the Daily Stone. So if you have Pad Pass, you basically get a dungeon every day, which basically lasts for like 2 to 3 days. So you don't need to log into the game every day. So if you're a busy person, then you could save up like 3 Pad Pass dungeons and then just run them all at once. That is entirely possible. So you're not going to lose out on your value for not playing every day, which I think is a very nice touch. It provides Daily Stone and a dungeon that gives sizable rewards that scale up the longer you have it. So this is basically a schedule of the upcoming dungeons and basically what it entails. If you were to basically summarize what's in here and convert it into just pure stamina, I don't have an exact number for it, but I can guarantee you that it is a tremendous amount that you're saving. Especially because a lot of these things have, yeah, so there are specific days where it says tier. These tiers, they go up every time you renew your Pad Pass. So, and they cap out at tier 5, I believe. And by that time, you're gonna get so many rewards that there are some resources that you will not have uses for. Unfortunately, that's something. It's not really unfortunately, but yeah, it's something that a lot of endgame players suffer from. I personally, on my main account, I joined Pad Pass kind of late, so I'm not at that point yet. But there are cases where people have too many monster points, as one example, where they have nothing to use it on and they just kind of burn it for free. So the main point of this is to go for the daily stones and these rewards. Because of the way that the rewards scale over time, it could be argued that the Pad Pass reward is actually more bang for your buck than even the $3 here. Though it does cost $9 USD per month. So if this fits into your budget, and let's say you can only set aside $10 for Pad every month, Pad Pass plus one of the dollar tiers is better than getting two of the dollar tiers, is what I'm trying to say. Arguably the most value. Oh yeah, Godfest exclusives. You get a guaranteed one every month with a Pad Pass, and the quality of the Godfest exclusive actually goes up over time. The reason why this is so important is because a lot of the endgame Godfest exclusives, especially the ones that you get at the later months, they are significantly worth more than, like, I just want to give out like an arbitrary number of like 100 stones. Like, people will whale harder for specific cards, and you can basically get it for $13, is what I'm trying to say. Granted that it does come from a pool, so you will need to get lucky to get the one that you want. But even if you don't, there's a good chance that the card that you get can be used in a different team. So, you know, it's worth it. You can also chase score dungeons with 7x6 leaders and going for combo because Pad Pass users aren't penalized for larger boards. So sometimes we get, like every collab, there's usually like a dungeon in the mythical stage where there's like a score indicator on the side. For Monogatari Mythical, you can actually see the little score indicator. You get scores based on like how high your average combo is, the rarity of your team, and stuff like that. And one of the things is, yeah, your combo. But there are certain leaders in this game that increase your board size to 7x6. Without the Pad Pass, you get penalized for having a larger board. But with the Pad Pass, you kind of bypass that restriction. So it's a little bit cheesy. But because the dungeons themselves usually aren't too difficult, it's not really too much of a handicap. So not even the obviously for sale ones. The thing about Pad is that we usually don't get sales. There's another thing that you could consider, whatchamacallit. Yeah, I'd consider the dollar with bundle where you get the stone and the roll. I consider that to be the basic tier. Or I guess that would be the obviously for sale ones. Yeah, for that one, yeah, I already went over it. So it is the most bang for your buck. That dollar bundle is the most bang for your buck. The second one that comes up is the Pad Pass. The $5 for 10 stone bundle, that is the tier below this one, is what I was trying to say. And as for the next one, yeah, there are two more tiers above this, from what I'd like to explain it as. So the next tier is basically a $20 bundle in events. This bundle ranges from being $20 to $30. The more expensive ones are $30. These ones are where there's typically 2 of them per event. Sometimes there can be more, depending on how long the event or seasonal event has been going on. So these $20 bundles are basically the most generic one that shows up every time is basically a one that it gives you 20 stones, so you get $1 per stone. Stone per dollar, blah. And you also get one roll that features the highest rarity cards. So depending on what you're after, this could be a very nice pickup. Like if you're planning on spending money anyways, you should prioritize these bundles first. And the other bundle that are sometimes multiples of, these are the ones that grant the orb skins. Now orb skins are customizable options. If you go into your team, you can see at the bottom left there's change orbs. And these are basically going to change the way that the orbs look in your game. As you can see, there's a whole bunch of them. And the way that you unlock these orb skins is by getting a card that features the orb skin. So in the Monogatari collab, it's actually Hanekawa. It is this card over here. And I'll just show you the bundle right now. So these bundles can be found in the Magic Stone Shop, and they're highlighted with a yellow and red text. See, the special one-time bargain set, this is the $5 for 10 Magic Stones, and you also get one free roll and some extra PAL points. PAL points, the value of PAL points have gone down significantly over time, but it is still a little bit of an extra that you can use to save stamina. I'd say its value went down over time because, I mean, its raw value didn't really change. It's just that the other materials got cheaper to grind for, I guess. So yeah, but it can still save you a decent chunk of stamina, but that's not the main feature. The lineup is basically just one roll in the RAM. It's nothing too special. You're not guaranteed any good cards, but the fact that you can get 2 stones per dollar is a really good ratio. And these bundles highlighted in yellow are the ones I'm talking about. So the first one is the $1 stone tier, where you get 1 extra roll. The $20 one, the one featuring Tsubasa Hanekawa, that is the one with the orb skin. So if you buy this, you get 20 stones and you get 1 Tsubasa Hanekawa egg machine roll, and you can only get this once. These bundles, you can only get them once. And this one is also, yeah, the 20 magic stones, and you get 1 of the higher tier rarities. If you're trying to aim for a specific 7-star, then it might be worth going for this thing first, and then spend your rolls until you get it, or stop if you get it on the first turn. Because RNG is a fickle thing, so you never know how much you're going to need for the next event. And yeah, it's pretty good value if you have to spare cash. Because in terms of just raw stones for $1, these are actually not very worth it. It's because you have to factor in the amount of quote-unquote stones you're missing out on by getting the unit instead. But if you factor that into account, like for example, the 30 stone bundle costs 19 USD, but the 20 stone plus roll costs 20. So for an extra $1 and for 10 less stones, you basically get a higher tier rarity card. But because the lower tier rarity cards in a lot of REMs are typically low in value, or you're gonna end up with too many of them, the trade-off is very well worth it. If you're planning on spending money in the first place, that is the big thing. And there are the occasional expensive bundles. These bundles typically come with anniversary events and stuff like that, where you would basically spend $50+ and you would get like 100 stones, or you would spend the equivalent of getting like the 85 magic stone pack, and it comes with a free roll with like with one of the best Gothfest exclusives, along with like a bunch of other little goodies like super snow globe dragons and such, etc. Those things are pretty good bang for your buck. But then again, those bundles typically aren't in everyone's budget. But if they are, and if you're whaling, then yeah, I'd say prioritize getting those as well. Yeah, they often contain a specific gacha with powerful units and or a bunch of other special goodies. And the tier after that would be just buying the regular stone bundles. About this, a word of caution. Because these bundles are priced this way to be nicer numbers, some of them don't actually make sense. Like, let me bring out a chart. I did a quick regional calculation for Canadian and USD prices for stone bundles. Let me just save this picture and bring this up on stream. Save this to desktop. OBS. Add a picture. And okay, so let me enlarge it a little bit. Okay, so this is basically a regional pricing between USD and Canadian stones. So I did a rundown on stones per USD, how much you can get. And from a quick glance, you can see that it's not really, it doesn't really make too much sense. Where's my restream chat? I lost my chat. But anyways, yeah, you can look at the stones per USD, and I did a delta from the previous tier, which basically compares how much more quote unquote efficient buying the next tier is compared to the previous one. So from this bundle, I would say that your smallest, like the smallest denominator that you would want to purchase magic stones with is the 12 stone, the 60 stone, and the 12, no, not the 60 stone, the 12 stone, the 30 stone, and the 85 stone tiers. The 60 tier stone bundle is actually a loss from the previous one, so if you want to save an extra cent, you can just buy 2 of the previous tier ones. But yeah, I don't know why it's priced like this, but yeah, stick to 12, 30, and 85 stone bundles, or just buy the packs and just be done with it. Let me just bring in my chat again. Okay. And so I wanted to do a little bit of interjection over here. I've been streaming for 45 minutes, but yeah, I planned to get this section out of the way a little bit earlier, but alas, here we are. Let me just hide this thing. Not the restream chat. Here we go. So the TLDR of what to do while listening. But before you get into it, there's some settings that I want you guys to explore. These are mostly just personal preference, but I think that they will make a big difference in how you enjoy the game and stuff like that. So, the first thing off, data installation. This thing, you want to press on. What data installation do? It's over here. So installing data involves you storing a part of this app's data in your device's memory in order to improve its performance. Because phone storage speeds are actually like abysmally slow. So it helps to have part of the game data loaded into the memory for faster game loading times. If you do data installation, you will notice a significant difference in the amount of time it takes for you to enter dungeons. So if you have a even slightly modern device, I would say go for it. And the next settings that I would want to recommend changing is for you to change your screen display settings for 2:1 if you're on a 16:9 display. Now, it's the option right underneath data installation at the very bottom. The reason for this change is if you're playing on 16:9, you actually end up losing a lot of screen real estate. And another handy thing that this thing does is if you enter a dungeon, I'm just gonna enter a dungeon real quick. If you enter a dungeon and you're playing on a 16:9 ratio, at the very top you can see an explanation of the leader skills. You will not get this information if you play on 16:9. There is simply not enough space to display this little tidbit. So this thing only comes with 2:1 screen ratios. Tablets have different sets of information that they show on the side. Though I'd argue that it's a lower quality, but information is information. But another handy thing about this thing is if you were to hover over a card, like if you press over a card, you will see its skill and its assist skill. So you will get a description of what the skill does, including its cooldown, and if it's available or not. So just because of these handy features, because otherwise if you want to check it out, you'd have to turn on skills. You'd have to tap a card and then you'd get a complete overview. But it distracts you from the experience. It's a lot easier to just press your finger on a card and just look at all the information. So there's one thing. And another thing that you can do is, let me just leave the dungeon. So under options and system, I'd say, okay, BGM and SFX, that's up to you. Voices is off because I have SFX off. But record sorting order, this thing is key. So if you have a preferred way of sorting your monster box, then you want to have it saved between each of your gameplay sessions. So I would highly recommend you keep that thing on. Manage boxes. What manage boxes does is it gives you these separate little tabs at the start. If you don't have it on, then you're basically going to be sorting by all. And if you do this, then you're going to be overwhelmed with cards that you don't even want to look at. So I'd say keep box sorting on. So the way I usually sort my boxes is I usually keep everything from the RAM favorited and in the not set box. And in one, I would keep like my event medals and tokens and stuff like that. And in box number 2, I would be using it as temporary storage in case I want to show off a selection of cards that I have, or etc. And these 3 tabs on the end are auto-managed, and this is the main reason why I would recommend you to use managed a box sort. It's because this groups up all the evolution materials in one space, and then this groups up all the awakening materials in one space, and this groups up all the enhancement materials in one space. Back before we had this feature, we'd have to be very careful with how we organize our stuff, and we had to be careful to not accidentally sell off important things. But after this thing got added, it's been a huge time and stress saver for sorting your box and stuff like that. So I would highly recommend keeping that thing on. Story skip, I actually have no idea what this thing does. You can experiment with on or off. I'm not sure if it has any effect. Like, I did story skip on, and I played through the normal story mode, and I didn't end up skipping anything, so I don't know what the point of it is. Like, it didn't skip any of the dialogues or animations, so you can just keep it on. User, I forgot what this does. But yeah, scroll bar is always handy to have. Especially if you get a larger box, you're gonna want to have it because for players with larger boxes in the end game, yeah, like you're gonna take a few seconds to scroll through each attribute of your card attributes. So you're gonna want to keep the scroll bar on. Custom filter, very useful. Stamina notifications, up to you. Recording mode, what recording mode does is basically, yeah, it hides your ID as well as the username and the ID of all other players. But, you know, I don't really care about that, especially for this account, so I'm just gonna keep it on. I mean off. So I basically keep everything on except for recording mode for system. As for dungeon, attribute is up to you. If you're colorblind, having the attribute on will help a lot because it actually shows the enemy attribute on the side of its health bar. Skills, I'd have it off. Just because I like to play a little bit faster. Though if you are a new player and you're playing on 16:9 device screen ratio and you don't want to switch to a 2:1 ratio, then yeah, you could keep on skills. Skills also gives you a little bit more information on the skill that you're about to activate because it gives you the max cooldown of the skill that is already available for you to use. If you have skills off and you hover with a 2:1 screen ratio, you will not get the information because it will only say available. So that is one other thing that you can take into account. Mass attack effect, it's purely visual. Colorblind mode, I'm personally slightly red-green colorblind. It's like mild deutero, I think. Yeah, but I still prefer to keep it off because the game looks kind of washed out and ugly. And it's also because my level of colorblindness is very mild. But for those with more severe colorblindness, yeah, you're probably going to want to consider doing it. Though do note that this thing does not have options for different types of colorblindness. It's just a on or off toggle. So I'm hoping that those with more severe colorblindness will be able to play this game with just attribute on and just relying on the color shapes. Check rewards. I believe this thing can skip the rewards screen at the end of the dungeon clear. It's up to you if you want to keep it on or off. Skip combos. I would highly recommend keeping on, especially for dungeons like story mode where you're running tricolor. You will get a lot of Skyfall combos. I'm just gonna say that right now. You will get a lot of Skyfall combos, and if you want to save some time, you should turn on skip combos, because or else you're gonna have to wait for them to tick up from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, blah blah blah. And yeah, your grind is gonna take way longer than it needs to. As for monster leveling is basically if you enter a dungeon, your monsters will get a small amount of EXP depending on how much stamina and how many floors there are in a dungeon. This is entirely up to you. The only reason to turn this off is if you have a team that requires a monster to be at a specific level and you cannot have it higher level because it might get slightly more attack that makes it go over a certain threshold. So if you want to avoid that, then you would turn monster leveling off, but otherwise I would recommend keeping it on because it's free resources. Share skin is a feature in multiplayer mode where if you enter a multiplayer mode with other players, you can share your orb skin with them, so that's the thing that they see. It's purely preference. You can have it on or off. It's up to you. As for attack multiplier, it's also preference, though I just keep it on because it's kind of fun to watch how hard your units are attacking. So what attack multiplier does is after the damage calculations on your card, as it attacks, you basically see how many more times of its attack it's dealing to the enemies. It might sound a little bit confusing and it's not really too valuable of a piece of information, but yeah, it's more for fun. And new effects is a new feature that came in recently. It changes the way that your monsters attack visually, so it has no effect in game. It's just a lot prettier. So yeah, so you can set those settings up like that. As for recording sorting order, here's one recommendation that I would do when sorting monsters is I have this custom sort and I used it for a very long time. This is basically what I would call an old favorite sort. Before a lot of the box reorganization things happened, this used to be the default sort for a lot of players if you just picked favorites. But then they switched it around a little bit, and I'm not really a fan of it, so I switched it back to replicate as close to the old sort as I could. Yeah. So it's up to you. The way that this sort works is basically all your favorite cards end up at the top. That's the first priority. So for that, for team building purposes, I would favorite every single card that you get from the rem and every useful farmable that you get. So that if you're running dungeons and then you get like trash mobs, they're going to be sorted at the very below. So it's easier to manage your box by basically splitting it into two halves. And another benefit to this is if you favorite a card, then you can't sell it off nilly-willy. You have to unfavorite the card and then you have to try to sell it. So this is one way where you can protect your important units by making sure that you can't just accidentally sell them. So I would highly recommend selling everything that I would highly recommend favoriting everything that you get from the rem, even if you don't follow the sorting order. And then what the rest of the sorting order does is it basically groups up monsters by primary attribute, and then it sorts by rarity, and then it sorts by sub-attribute, so that you basically have a nice overview of what cards you have. And especially as you get better and better at this game, you will remember cards for their attributes and sub-attributes. So if you know what a card... so if you forget what a card name is, but you know what it looks like, I guess, kinda, then you can basically just go to that specific section in your monster box, and then, yeah, it becomes a huge quality of life bonus if you sort this way. So, dungeon, finish tutorial. Oh yeah, so another thing that you can do after you do set those settings is after you finish tutorial, you can roll Monogatari collab until you get the units that you want. Now about this, you might want to reroll here if you don't care too much about the collab, then it's fine to stop after getting a few 7 stars. But there's a good chance that if you are watching this video, then or stream, is that you're probably playing this because of the Monogatari collab. In which case that you might just want to roll for your favorite characters, and that's perfectly fine because of the way that we are getting free stones right now. Though I would say you should not be aiming for collecting all the 7 stars. Like, full disclaimer, this box that I have in my account right now, this is not representative of a standard rolling session. This is an extreme case of streamer luck and is very representative of what you would expect from a normal box. Like, the rates of getting a 7 star and above are like 23%-ish, I think. Whereas in this case, it's over 50. It's like 50%. It's like 50% with a nice even spread of everything good and nothing bad. So this is an extreme case of streamer like this is not representative. I probably should have made another account that has a more realistic scenario in it. But because I kind of committed myself to doing the story mode and because it takes like a good hour or two, yeah, I didn't want to do it. But yeah, you can roll for the favorite characters that you want. If you are handy with math, you can also basically calculate the odds at which you would get like like how many stones you would need to approximately roll to get the card that you want. There is full disclosure of what each of the rates are for each of the individual cards. Do note that Hanakawa, because she is an orb skin card, she is slightly lower than the other cards of the same rarity. Koyomi Araragi is a 2% card because he is the highest tier. And yeah, if you sum up all the rarities of the 6 stars, which aren't really used too much, then you get 77% and subtract 1 from that, and you get 23% chance to get one of the decent cards. So with 150 stones, you can roll as much as you want. If you care about the collab, then I would say just roll as much as you want until you get the characters, or you can even re-roll until you get the characters that you want within a reasonable amount of stones burnt. Or you can just roll for a couple of 7 stars and just be on your merry way. Because I will say that you cannot build a full team with only the cards that you get in this Monogatari series egg machine. So I would not recommend burning everything. Like, you get 300 something stones, save at least half of it, please. You don't want to have too many 6 stars because you will not be able to use too many of them in later on in endgame dungeons. So So as a brief overview, I did a full overview in my previous stream. You can check out the link to that in my channel. I'll also throw in a link in the description. But yeah, the key units are Koyomi Araragi. So he is the highest rarity card, the 8-star card. This guy is great if you have him. He has very easy team building requirements. He's a super strong card in general. He's endgame viable. Suba, and the other 2 cards of note are Hitaki Senjogahara and Suraga Kambaru. It helps to have at least one of each if you're trying to build a water team with Monogatari series egg machine. But if you have one or the other, then it's perfectly fine to just build around them. I'm just saying that if you have a mix of both, then it's good. Your early game team building will be significantly boosted if you have both, because they pair really well with each other. Nareko Sengoku, like, I'm not going to go too deeply into like the team building specifics because I did that in a previous video. But for the people that are rerolling while I'm going to be rambling off for like the next hour or two, it would help a lot if you have a general idea of what to roll for, right? So this is why I want to make this quick introduction. So Nareko Sengoku, this card over here, she is hard to build. She is hard to build a team around for new players, so I would not recommend getting her. Well, aiming specifically for her if you only care about the meta. And by the time that you actually have enough units to build a fully fleshed out team for her, there's a good chance that you might be power crept with another wave of stronger cards. So I would not recommend going for her unless you manage to pull 2 to 3 copies of her. If you pull 3 copies of her, then it's easy. If you pull 2 to 3 copies of her, then it's easy to say to commit to that account because there are some farmable options that you can use, and she is completely viable of like completely stomping on most of the other content in this game. It's only a problem if you only have one of her and you don't have many other subs to work with, because she requires other than using her own dupes, she requires some fairly specific team building subs, which are rare Gothfest exclusives, or in the case, or some extremely difficult to get farmable monsters. So I would not bet on her if you only have 1 copy of her. I would say reroll. But if you have other units, then it's fine to keep her as a little bonus on the side. But yeah, the 3 units that you'd want to roll for if you only care about the meta and you only want to play the game is Koyomi Araragi, Suruga Kambaru, and Hitaki Senjogahara. Now there's also Tsubasa Hanakawa, which is the light. She is this card. She is also the orb skin card in the $20 bundle. She is not recommended to have. She's not recommended to be the only 7-star that you roll for, simply because she is also hard to build a team around, like Sengoku Nareko Sengoku. Yeah, but the thing is, a lot of people are hyping her up because there's a possibility, like in the Japanese meta right now, she is extremely powerful. She's top tier because she pairs up with Captain Marvel from the Marvel collab. But we don't know if we're gonna get the Marvel collab in North America, as counterintuitive as that sounds. So I would say, if you have her, it's a nice to have, but don't bet on it. And don't let her be the only 7-star that you roll from the machine. As for the other cards, there is Oshino, Shinobu Oshino. She's not great to be the only 7-star to build around, and the same goes for Mayoi Hachikuji. Hachikuji, she's not recommended for beginners, but veterans might want her for very niche cases. She hurts a lot as a light unit, so she could be used as a damage stick, or she could also be used as a support unit, but her skill is kind of whack, and her equip is a triple skillbind resist card, which is a very niche use case, but could be useful for endgame players, depending on what kind of team they're making. So it's yeah, don't roll for these cards specifically unless you're really a big fan of it. But then if you are, make sure you get some of the first 3 that I mentioned before. So Araragi, Kanbaru, or Senjogahara, you want at least 1 or maybe 2 of them. And by 1 or 2 of them, I don't mean that you should get like 1 of each or anything like that. If you get 2 of 1, then you can also work around team building with that, because they actually have good evos and base pair. Yeah, they have good evos and they also have good base forms. Koyomi Araragi specifically, he's often seen with 2 ofs in a team, where 1 is using his base and 1 is using his evo. So if you can get 2 of them, really good on you. You should definitely stick with that account, but I wouldn't bet on it because it's a 2% chance to roll it. And so for the next section, after you have finished rolling, this is basically a TLDR. You might want to screen cap this for while I'm explaining. This is just some things that you can do while I'm rambling. So after you have rolled, you can basically do normal dungeons for 0 stamina, and you need this to be rank 20 to unlock story dungeons. So you can basically just clear your way through normal dungeons until you hit rank 20. Another way to get a quick burst of EXP is to basically just roll the lower tiers of Monogatari, which cost 15 to 25 stamina each. Or yeah, and you can do that and then basically just bump yourself up to rank 20 as fast as you want, and then from then on you can just start spamming story dungeons and just keep running story dungeons. You're gonna want to clear all 3 of these as soon as possible. It's gonna be the first thing that you do, because without it, building your first team is gonna be a huge pain. Trust me on this one. Finish these. So yeah, so alternate between clearing the easier event dungeons and ranking up with normal dungeons. You're gonna want to finish all the normal dungeons anyways. So once you have story mode, start running it. Bounce between running story mode dungeons and ranking up by clearing new normal dungeons until you clear all 3 stories. And once you get all 3 stories completed, you'll get 100 extra stones, 1,000 tomajas, and 3,000 pluses. I'll go into more of why these things are so important, but you should have a general idea of why stones are important, so that's no surprise of everyone. But tomajas and pluses are basically what's going to complete your teams, so you're going to want to hold on to those. And you also get evolution materials you can use later on when you have the base units. So these story modes are basically focused around 3 central protagonists. Sonia's chapter is based around Sonia, Odin is around Odin, and For Guardian Haku is around Haku. And if you clear the story mode, you get evo materials that will let you evolve your units to become the story mode, like quote unquote overpowered versions of themselves, or the version that they become at the end of the story, at the culmination. So you could do that. Right now there is an option to buy Haku for 500,000 monster points, but that's not accessible to but while that's not accessible to new players, it may be for veterans if you need an extra copy of Haku. This thing is only restricted for people that actually don't have Haku at all, any form of her. So that's one way to pick up your first copy of it. In the future story chapters as well, whenever we get a new one, there will be an option to buy the first unit, I believe. Yeah, through the Monster Point shop. So that might be something you might want to save up for later on. So using the resources that you got, build your small team with what you have on hand, not handy. And clear as many expiring dungeons as you can, namely the ones that are expiring within 24 hours, and by the end of the week, And dungeon timers are based on midnight PST and typically reset on Mondays. So dungeon timers reset on midnight PST or 3 a.m. EST, and there are some limited dungeons which end before that, like Extreme King Metal Dragon. These are called limited time dungeons, and you can see the schedule for them in the top right corner just by pressing the LTD button. So this is the schedule represented in PST. And so yeah, you have to adjust them according to your time zone. And as you are doing that, yeah, the expiring dungeons are important to clear right now because you don't know if they're going to come back ever. Like the gift dungeons, they don't come back. They're meant to give you free stones along with like a little extra thing. So make sure you clear those. And the experience of a lifetime thing, these things give a ton of rank EXP, specifically like I think it's like 200,000 EXP each. So you want to hold off on them until you need the EXP. I'll go more into how you can use experience of the lifetimes later on, and if you should farm ranks or not. It is opinion based, but I'll give my breakdown on what your potential thought process could be regarding rank farming. But for now, I would not recommend clearing these. Just hold off until you get to my explanation. And yeah, and the other thing that you're going to want to do is farm Monogatari. So after you finish the story mode dungeon, you're going to have 76 stamina, and you have the option of running these top 2 floors. Now, what the first thing that you should do is basically just, depending on what kind of 7 stars you rolled, you want to use the card that's the most flexible for your team. I used Araragi because it's 2 times all stats for Dark attribute. I know that Kanbaru doesn't actually have Dark inner attribute, but because I'm scaling it up, because Araragi himself is extremely strong, I didn't really care about that, so I just threw in all my 7 stars that I wanted to work on, and I started entering this dungeon. So what this dungeon does is, I'll just do a quick run for demonstration purposes. So it costs 50 stamina, and at the end of the dungeon, when you clear it, you will get a skill up for each of the cards that you entered the dungeon with. Now what a skill up does is it basically reduces the amount of maximum, reduces the maximum cooldown for your skills. And this is especially important for certain cards like Senjogahara, because her skill goes down from a cooldown of 6 maximum turns per activation to 1, which means that you can actually use her every single turn. Now, let me just get this out of the way so you can see it. So yeah, this is basically just a demonstration of the orb skin as well. I honestly prefer to use the base one. I just forgot to change it back. Just because I'm so used to seeing it, and because I'm more of a competitive player. In ranking dungeons, I can't use anything other than the base one anyway, so yeah. So this dungeon isn't necessarily hard. It's not meant to be difficult. It's meant to just be a showcase of the units, kinda, not really. I have the sound off for the stream, but if you have sound on, there should be a Monogatari based soundtrack as well. Oh, I messed that up. So while you skill your cards up this way, you also get the event token drops. You're gonna need a lot of these because you're gonna want to trade for the event cards. So if it costs 50 stamina, EXP is less of a concern over here. But you also get a little bit of EXP for just running a dungeon with monster leveling enabled. And you also get skill ups. Now, the way that skill ups, and the reason why this is so important is skill ups on most of the cards that you're going to be using, the active skills of, you're going to want it to be low as possible. And the main methods of doing that are basically either running the skill up dungeon, which is the cheapest and most economic way to skill up as many cards as possible with the least amount of stam, or to use Ps. I will show you what a P is here. So these RPs, they can be farmed with using mid-game dungeons called arenas. And the thing is, you only get one per run, and these Ps cost, and each arena time, each time you enter an arena, it's gonna cost you 50 stam if you're in co-op or 100 stam if you're entering a solo. And you get one of these, and each of these scales up a unit of the same attribute once. And if you compare that to just running the Monogatari collab dungeon like I did and scaling up 5 cards with 50 stam, yeah, you can see that it's a lot more efficient to just use a scale up dungeon. Another thing to note is regarding scaling up with that dungeon, you cannot scale up cards by entering them in co-op, so it's solo only. So don't be disappointed if you try to run it with a co-op and try to scale like 10 cards at once. That's not going to work, unfortunately. Though, good on you for considering that in the first place. And anyways, so that is the other way of scaling up cards. And the third way of scaling up cards is to use King Tans. For that explanation, I think I'll actually swap over into my main account. Yeah, my main account has a lot more things, so it's a lot easier to show off what I mean. One second, water break. Whoops. 1 second. Do I have D&D on? I do. Okay. Oh, there's a new data patch. I didn't expect that. Whatever. So the other way of scaling up your cards is if it can load in. Okay. Is via the use of King Tans. Ow, my ears. Yeah, they're called King Tans, but it's not really in the name. They're called King Bub Tans, or they have their own little names for it, for each of their attributes. It's a little bit different. But the way that you use these cards is basically if you fuse one of these into your, like, I'm assuming that you know how Monster Fusion works because you should have cleared the tutorial. So if you fuse one of these along with 4 other cards that have the same skill, you will get 4 guaranteed skill ups. Now, if you were to not use the King Bubtan, it depends on the skill up rate that is currently going on. So right now, there's a skill up chance of ×8. I believe last time I checked it, that means it's like an 80% skill up chance. But without an event going on, you have like a 10% chance of skill up, so the King Tan brings it up to 100%. So the use of King Tans is recommended if you're farming a farmable card and you want to skill it up as much as possible, because a lot of the farmable units that people use in endgame team nowadays are ones with like 30 turn or higher, 30 to like up to like 50 or 100 even max skill levels, I believe. I don't think it's been 100, but like 30 to 50. And if you were to consider using Ps on that, then you could quickly imagine how much of a stamina cost and time sink that would be. Because not even including the stamina cost, if you were to run an arena, most of the times in the end game, it's gonna take you like 15. There are teams that run the easier arenas much faster, but for a typical arena run, I would say that it takes around from like 10 to 20 minutes. And yeah, if you were to multiply that by 50, you can see how much of a time sink it would be to scale up with using only Ps. Though there are other ways to farm Ps that come during events, but I'll go into more of that later. So that's basically the little bit of an introduction that I wanted to give. And regarding Monogatari collab specifics, you can grind the dungeon for a Kiss Shot, the Trigon Mask, and the Diamond Dragon Fruit. So what I mean by this is, as you run the dungeon, you're gonna end up getting cards like did I not run the dungeon at all? Whatever. So you're gonna get collab dungeon drops in the form of tokens like this. This is the rainbow token. It's the highest tier one. So you're gonna typically see like the bronze and silver ones a lot. The bronze ones are traded up at a rate. The bronze, silver, and gold ones are traded up at a ratio of 5-1. So 5 bronzes become 1 silver, 5 silvers become 1 gold, and 5 golds become 1 diamond. And you're basically gonna want to farm up enough of these to, basically get the following units. So Kiss Shot. You're definitely gonna want to get her. She's a cleric. Her active skill is useful actually. You're going to want to skill her up during the Monogatari collab dungeon by sticking her onto your team. As a leader, she's okay. Like, if you have no friends in pad, you can actually pair up with Araragi and give yourself a follow-up attack. Especially for the lower difficulty dungeons where tankiness isn't really a factor that you have to concern yourself with. She has a decently high attack multiplier, and she also has high personal attack damage as well. Along with being a cleric, like, she's an overall pretty solid unit for newer players. And even for endgame players, her active could be useful in the form of a cleric ability. Because she fully recovers awakened skill binds and unmatchable orb statuses. Do note that the healing is iffy. It's pretty effective on lower difficulty dungeons, but in the endgame dungeons where monsters tend to have higher defenses, the 50 times attack is not enough to break their defense, and you might only end up healing for 1 damage. So in those cases, it's going to be kind of disappointing. So I would say don't bet on it, but focus more on her use as an awoken bind clear and an unmatchable orb clear. Because yeah, awoken skill bind is more useful than the base just bind clear, because most of your units should have this awakening in the first place. Yeah, this awakening in the first place, which basically makes oh, the sync is off. Yeah, this little thing over here. This thing makes your card invulnerable to bind effects, and you're gonna want to build a team around having at least a couple of these on all your monsters. And another thing that you can do is getting carried in 2P. I mean, getting carried in 3P is also an option. By 3P, I mean joining the 3-player dungeon under multiplayer search for partners. You can queue for this one, and just get carried. Though I wouldn't really recommend it because you're kind of wasting people's time. But a lot of the people in this community are nice enough to just carry through it. Some might just get fed up with you and just leave the dungeon and just, well, not leave, but disconnect from the dungeon and just clear out by themselves. But oftentimes you can find people to carry yourself through it, though I wouldn't recommend it until you get a better grasp of the game itself. This dungeon itself is going to be harder than the thing that I showed off, and because it is annihilation difficulty, the numbers are going to be cranked way up, like the amount of health the enemies have and stuff like that. So I would be wary. If you want to get yourself carried through this, then I would recommend asking on forums or the Pat Discord. Okay, don't spam the Pat subreddit for this, please, for the love of God. But you can ask for new player help and new player carries in the Pat Discord. So regarding this as well, for most players, I would recommend only running this once if you don't have a team to clear the dungeon by yourself. Yeah, just for the stone. And for the other option is to basically just run the hardest difficulty of Monogatari series just by yourself. Not the one at the very top, but the mythical dungeon ones. So run the skill up dungeons as much as you need to basically skill all your cards, but focus on running the mythical dungeon right afterwards. I'm not sure if running apparitions and specialists for the 6-star version is better for farming tokens. It might be than mythical just because of the extra floor, but I'm not too sure about that. If someone could correct me on this one, that'd be great. I'll check the dungeon drop spreadsheet later to verify this information. But yeah, and you're gonna want to grind this. So basically this dungeon, or if you want, there's another option of grinding the lowest tier difficulty, but that's more for endgame players because it's not really stamina efficient. And my recommendation for the Monogatari Mythical is to run it with a co-op friend. Maybe you have another friend that plays Monogatari, that plays pad. Yeah, you guys can try running the dungeon together and basically farm up your tokens that way. So the benefit of running a dungeon in 2-player is basically the stamina cost gets halved. So you basically split the cost among your teammates. This does not apply for 3-player. And one of the downsides of running 2-player is that your badge doesn't come into effect. But beyond that, you can save a lot of time. And a lot of your awakenings are shared. Like your resistances are shared. Your skill boosts are shared. So one strategy a lot of people do is basically just enter the dungeon together and then just disconnect by enabling Wi-Fi. By enabling airplane mode. And if you do that, then you can continue the dungeon by yourself with the benefits of having your badge and all the skill boosts of each team. So I'll go more into that later, but we still haven't gone to the meat of the player improvement campaign over here yet. So this is basically all that you could have done. How long have I been rambling on for? An hour and 23 minutes. Jesus. Okay. So the next thing that I want to do is a unit overview, and I just wanted to basically go over what a card is and what kind of information you can get from it. So because it's the Monogatari collab, I'm gonna bring up Koyomi Araragi. So over here we have the unit stats. We have HP, attack, and recovery. They're pretty straightforward. HP is basically how much HP your team will have. It is the cumulative sum of all the HP cards in your team multiplied by any potential leader skill bonuses and team awakenings that you may have. Let me just clear this awakening. So the next thing is attribute. On the character portrait on the left side. So basically over here, you see 2 different little things on the top and the bottom right. Top left and bottom right. These represent attributes. And the way that these attributes work is that there's red, green, blue, light, and dark. Light and dark attributes are 2 times effective against each other and are 1x effective against every other type. Red, green, and blue. Red is effective against green. Green is effective against blue. Yada yada yada. It's the standard like elemental triangle thing that you see in a lot of games and such. And they do 1x effectiveness against light and dark units. And as with elemental triangles, as they go with the typical elemental ones. So while blue does 2 times damage to red, it does half the damage to green. And there is no elemental disadvantage when it comes to light and dark. So those kind of teams are preferred in a lot of cases, though in a lot of endgame teams, we have units that deal so much damage that it doesn't really matter. So yeah, it's just one little thing to take note of. It does come into play later on when you're facing dungeons with well, this isn't a far end game, but there could be monsters with extremely high defenses where even if you cap out on damage, you might not be able to break through its defense because it's so high. In those cases, the elemental attribute will matter. But for the most part, until you get to that point, which is likely going to be like a year from now for you-ish. Okay, maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration. It depends on how much you play, but it'll be a long while away before that happens. So the next point of interest is through skills. Now, there's 2 set of skills over here. There is the active skill, which is the top one over here. And there's also going to be the leader skill, which is on the bottom. So the top skill, it's just called skill. This is basically the active skill that you see in games within the dungeon. So every time... so starting from the top, it has its name, and on the top right, there is the turn, its cooldown. So if you hover over the card, you can actually see what its maximum cooldown is, how low you can take it to. So its maximum cooldown is a level 6, and it goes down to a maximum cooldown of 7 turns. So what this means is you can just skill it up 5 times, and then it's going to be at its fullest potential. You will not want to upgrade the skill levels on certain cards depending on how you want to use them. This is mainly for assists, or for specific dungeons where you might have too many skill boosts and you don't want its assist to come up. But that's also something to consider for a later time. But for the time being, it just helps to read over what the card does, because there's too many people that actually don't read in this game and they just like to have ideas thrown at them, please don't be one of them, and please take your time to read over the major cards that you get. You'll be surprised by how much utility you might be able to squeeze out from it. And it also helps to basically just practice your own team building skills. I'll go into how to improve your units and work on your team building later. I'll do a brief little segment on that. But for now, just read through your cards and make sure you understand what they do. So I covered the top skill, and oh yeah, the skill, it charges up every time that you match an orb. Now, there are two ways to match an orb because first off, there's the standard way of you... actually, there's a couple. I'll list a few of them. So the first way is to basically just... during your turn, you will be able to move your orbs around, and then you can attack. So after the end of your attack, your skill cooldowns will go down by 1, and then it'll be the enemy's turn, and then it'll be your turn again. Okay, wait. No, that was a little bit of a misrepresentation. So at the start of your turn, you will get your cooldowns will go down by 1 turn. Yeah. And when your card's turn just came up, you will actually see like a little visual effect with a card like jumping up slightly and a sound effect to go with it. So that is how you'll know that a card is available. It'll also be shining with like a blinking backlight. So it's not hard to understand when your card is going to be coming up. You can also just do a long press on the card to see when the active skill is going to come up. The second way is to basically use haste skills, which are built into cards. Let me just show you one example of one. So Izuku Gaien, in her skill, you can see other ally skills charged by 1 turn at the very end of the skill. This means that once you activate this skill, every other card in your team will have their skills cooldowns reduced by 1 during that turn. So there are some teams that use this ability to use that kind of ability to basically chain short skills over and over again, back to back. But yeah, that requires a different kind of team building, which I'm not really going to go into this time. That kind of team building is more used for farming specific dungeons, or just using like a cookie cutter farming team that just plows through a lot of the older content easily. But I'm gonna do team building with a focus in mind for arenas for newer players, because that's when the Ps start appearing, and that's gonna be your main source of grind for the time being. So the leader skill is basically 2 times all stats for dark attribute, 9 times attack when erasing dark orbs, reduces damage, +1 combo, and inflicts 1 damage when 2 attributes attack at once. Now, whenever a leader skill is as lengthy as this, you're going to want to focus on where the semicolon is. In this case, it's over here at the very end. Here. I got my arrow wrong. Here we go. Yeah. So 2 times attack... 2 times all stats for dark attribute and 9 times attack when erasing dark orbs. Semicolon. So the 9 times attack when erasing dark orbs. So if you match any like 3 or more dark orbs at 1 turn, your attack is going to be multiplied by 9 times. And then the next part of leader skill is reduces damage, +1 combo, and inflicts 1 damage with 2 plus attributes attack. So if you were to, for example, attack with dark and light as Koyami's attributes are, then in that case, you will take reduced damage the following turn. Your combo count will go up by 1, and you will also deal 1 extra damage as a follow-up attack. Now, what this means is, if you have another card that has like dark and red attributes, and you don't match any dark orbs, and instead you match red and light, in that case, you will not have the 9 times the attack bonus, and instead you will only get the reduced damage +1 combo and the 1 damage follow-up attack. So the way that this can be used is to basically, because your damaging component and your tankiness component are 2 separate things, you can focus on only activating the tanky component while you build up your dark orbs on your board for a more powerful attack that you can just build up later on, and focus on stalling for your skills and such. So this is one characteristic of a really good endgame leader card, where its tankiness and attacks are 2 separate components, and you can easily switch between the 2 as needed. So that's pretty much the leader skill. I'll go into the more specifics of how leader skills and things multiply with each other right after the segment, so please hold on to your seatbelts. there's gonna be a lot of maths involved in that one, though there will be a TLDR as well. So after the leader skills, there's the awakenings, which is basically the column of things on the side over here. Oops. So these little things. Each of these things are called awakenings, and every card has a maximum of 9 plus 1. Oh. So 9 plus 1 awakenings. I'll go into what the plus 1 is in a little bit. So about the 9 awakenings is because I think it's partly remnant of how the game is designed in the past, because in the older screens you couldn't really fit more than 9 awakenings on the screen at one time. There are a lot of little things that are remnants of how the game was designed in the past. Awakenings is one of them. The damage cap is another one of them. Though they do technically use it as a baseline to evaluate fairness, and they balance their game around those mechanics instead of overcoming it with new technology, but I digress. It's their design choice. So regarding these awakenings, if you want to see what each of these awakenings do, you can actually just hover over and then you can see what awoken number they are and what they do. It gives you a description of each of them. Do note that these do not give you specific numbers on how, like, there's a big problem with pad where it doesn't give you enough information right from the app itself, and that's a lot of people's source of complaints because of its ambiguity. Like, for example, resistance bind plus. This thing is okay. Blocks bind attacks directed at itself. Another version of this awakening is where let me just show it off over here. So if I just go into filter and awakenings, yeah. So there are 2 versions of this awakening. There's one over here, which is resistance bind plus, which is the one that you saw in Aragi, where it blocks the bind resist directed at itself. And there's another one, which is a smaller version of that with a smaller X, which is may block bind attacks directed at itself. Now, veterans will know that this is effectively 50% bind resist. So 50% of the time, if you have it on, you'll block it, and 50% of the time, you won't. It's not stated in the game. So this level of ambiguity frustrates a lot of players who don't really want to have to use like external guides for their information. Like, I sympathize with them, but because I'm a long-term veteran, I've kind of gotten over that hump. But it's very understandable why people would be so frustrated with it, especially whenever new mechanics come out. So these are the kinds of awakenings. Before I go into the full list of what each of them are, I just want to go back to Araragi for a little second. So you will notice that each of these awokens have numbers on them. So awoken 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, up to 9. Every tamadra that you feed them will increase this, will unlock these awakenings from the top down. So there may be cases where you might want to not unlock all of the awakenings, and I'll show you one case where a monster actually doesn't have all the awakenings enabled. Is in the ranking dungeon team, Sakuya has, yeah, she does not have the skill boost plus. So your activated awakenings are shown as lit up icons on the right hand side, and the ones that aren't active are dimmed out like you saw in Araragi before. So before I go into a full overview, I just want to show off what this thing is as well. No, I should probably do an overview of awakenings as well. Filter awakenings. So as for awakenings, on the left hand side over here, these are skill boosts. They increase the amount of skill boosts. Like for each skill boost, like for this one, the top one, it reduces the cooldown that you start off with by 1, and the bottom one, it reduces the cooldown that you start off with by 2. So for a lot of teams, you're going to want to have enough of them to get your critical skills up in time for the first floor, or as early as you need them. The next set of awakenings here is the fingers. The top one increases your movement time by 0.5 seconds. It says slightly extends time, but it's 0.5 seconds. And the bottom one increases your movement time by 1 second. For newer players, you might want to prioritize getting as many of these on your team as possible, just so that you can get your hands, just so that you can not mess up boards while you're learning. Endgame players should be able to match all 6x5 boards with less than 8 seconds. The veterans can probably do it in like 5 or 4. Though yeah. I really wouldn't expect most players to be able to solve boards in 3 or less seconds, though in those kind of scenarios you usually have ways to circumvent it. Either by using active skills to override debuffs, or by using a leader skill that has a fixed orb movement time. So that's up to you. The next set of awakenings over here is the 7 and 10 combo awakenings. For these ones, your card's damage, your specific card with these awakenings, its damage is going to be multiplied by 2 or 5 if you hit 7 or 10 combos. As for the next section over here, these are follow-up attacks. So if you match hearts with the one at the top, if you match hearts in a column, you will deal 1 extra damage at the end of your turn. And for the one on the bottom, if you match hearts in a 3x3 square, you will deal 99,999 damage as a bonus follow-up attack. And then the next section is the binds, and then here are the resists. Oops, my cursor got a lot thinner. So here are the resists. There's 6 awakenings that I want to highlight. The ones on the bottom resist blinds, jammers, and poisons 100% just by having one of them on the team. They're indicated by having the gigantic X on top of the icon. And the ones on the top with the smaller X's, with the smaller red X's, those ones have a 20% chance of blocking each resists each. So the way that older team building worked before we got a lot of these super resists is to try to get 15 resists, well 5 of each on a team through the use of assist equips, and just by mixing and matching them. So it's pretty good to have for team building, especially if you want to have a generic like Swiss Army knife kind of team that you can enter a lot of mid-game dungeons blindly and just clear them nilly-willy. For those ones, you're gonna want to have important resists for everything that you need. There are some teams that rely on having jammers and poison orbs, whether it be for orb conversion or for damaging units themselves. In those cases, you're not going to want to have resists for them, and you can use those spare awakening slots for something else. And the 2 awakenings on the side over here. For these things, the top thing is an equip awakening. If a card has this awakening and you assist it onto another card, it will get that assist card's awakenings as well on top of the normal card. Now I'll show an example of this. So over here you can see that this card actually goes beyond the standard 9+1 awakening limit. And this is because the card that is assisted on top of it has this awakening over here. And the other awakenings on the side are basically what it comes with. And as for the card itself, this is what it looks like. So it's a pretty, cards with these assist awakenings are going to have generally a lot less awakenings on them because they end up as a supplement to the base card. But yeah, oftentimes they can end up completely breaking the power level of a card by making it become way stronger or making it way more useful and fit in much more situations. And for the rest of these, 2 program attack and a lot of these other awakenings, I guess I'll do a quick overview of them. 2-pronged attack increases the damage your card does if you match 4 of its attribute in a time. VDP, it pierces void damage. If you make a blob of a 3x3 of that attribute, this thing grants you an extra combo orb. This thing grants you an extra combo orb and an extra combo on your turn. If you match 10 to 12 of that card's attribute at once in a big blob, this thing gives damage multipliers depending on how high or low your HP is, whether it's above 50%, and if you're above 80% HP with the left one, then your damage goes up by 50%. If it's below 50% HP, then it gets doubled with the right one. These L unlocks and L protection ones, I believe they multiply your damage by 1.5. Your card's damage by 1.5 times if you with the one on the left, if you match 5 orbs in an L shape as indicated by the little icon, or if you match 5 hearts in an L shape as indicated by the right icon. These two are more resist for cloud and tape. These things are these awakenings basically increase the chance that your orb, when they spawn on the board, when they drop down from the sky, the chance that they come enhanced, it goes up by 20% each per orb. So if you want to have 100% enhanced Skyfall, then you want to have 5 of the main attribute that you're running. So for my Adadaki team, I would preferably have 5 of these on team spread out between various cards. And for hearts, it's kind of the same story. And also enhanced orbs, the more you have, the more powerful your enhanced orbs are. So they actually scale beyond having 5 of them, and if you have way more of them, then they act as like a giant multiplier in itself. This thing is honestly not used that much, but if you match hearts in a row, then you end up bind clearing your team for 3 turns per one of these in your team. This thing breaks through defense. If you match 5 attributes, you can basically just read up on each of these. For these ones, your team damage goes up by 20% for each row that you have on your team, for every row that you make. A lot of teams actually base their damage around these. I'll go more into the damage calculations afterwards. These things basically target specific enemy attributes. These blocks of skills over here, they target specific enemy attributes, and then they multiply their damage, the damage your card does to it, by 3 times per, and they scale multiplicatively. These things, these awakenings reduce the damage taken by each of these awakening attributes by, I believe, 7% or something like that. And these ones give raw stat bonuses. The 3 ones on the left give stat bonuses to the card itself, and the one on the right give stat bonuses across the team. So one of these increases your team's HP by like 5% or something, and one of these increases your team's recovery by 20% each. So they scale pretty quickly if you have a couple of them. And these awakenings actually reduce the amount of HP, attack, and recovery on your team. They have their own uses, but they're typically on cards where their assist awakenings typically have other super strong effects to go with it. For example, there are equips where let me just show it off. Whoops. So yeah, for cards like this, where this assist would give you 100% poison resist, but at the cost of reducing your card's attack and recovery by a big amount, by negative 1,000 and 2,000 each. So yeah, these kind of equips are, you gotta be careful with them. Some teams actually rely on them to not to bring down their healing to 0 to have it easier to manage. Like if you're running a team where your stats are significantly boosted if you're maintaining, I mean, your attack is significantly boosted if your HP is under a certain threshold. In those cases, it might be handy to run it, but in most cases, you would not want to do it because it kind of removes your ability to heal afterwards. And if you're running a team like that, then you're going to end up relying on actives to give you your heal. For some teams, it works. For some teams, it doesn't. It really depends. There's no generic one use case fits all kind of thing for this. As for the rest, once I go down, these things, Poison Surge and Jammer Surge, if you have these on your team, Poison and Jammer Orbs will start appearing as natural Skyfall. And if you have a card that has one of these awakenings and you match a Poison or Jammer Orb, the card itself will deal 2 times more damage. So it's a let me just show you an example of what I mean. Bakura. So this is a card from the Yu-Gi-Oh collab. Yes, we had a Yu-Gi-Oh collab before, and Bakura has basically 4 of these Poison Awakenings. One over here, and there's like 3 over here. So with these 4 awakenings, they just because you have more of them doesn't mean that there's gonna be more Poison Skyfall. It's a toggle. It's like a binary on or off. If you have one on your team, then your Skyfall chances of getting Poison Orbs are enabled or not. But if you match a Poison Orb, then Bakura's personal damage is multiplied by 2 to the power 4 because he has 4 of these. So yeah, you can kind of see how the damage scaling kind of goes off the charts with certain assist awakenings. And as for the others, there's a co-op boost awakening over here, which increases your card's base stats by 50%. Not base stats. Your card's stats by 50% for each multi-boost awakening you have on your team. This thing actually gives you 1,000 HP recovery per turn, I think. This thing is more of a niche farming feature, where if you have it on your team, the chance of enemies dropping an egg or a treasure chest increases by like 3% each, I believe. And this thing is a voice awakening. If your card has it awakened, then you actually use this active skill, and you have your SFX on, you will hear it say something. But for everyone else, it also does come with a generic stat boost as well, where it gives 10% extra stats. Yeah, increases all stats by 10%. Not affected by Awoken Skillbind. So even if you're Awoken Skillbind, your character's still gonna shout out its key phrases. These are Takoyaki awakenings. They're new. So the way that these awakenings work is if you match 2 of these attributes or more, they start scaling like rows do. Yeah, that's about the TLDR I can give of them. You can find out specifics of how each of them work in a future. No, it's not a future video that I'm gonna upload, but there are guides out there with damage calculation maths. I'll actually bring up a chart right after this segment. And these are latent awakenings. These take up different slot. For example, the latent awakening slots are this. They take up from 1 slot to 2 slot to 6 slots each. For example, these ones over here are skill delay resists. So whenever an enemy monster tries to delay your skills by an X amount of turns, each of these prevent these by 1 turn each. So for example, if an enemy is trying to stall me for 5 turns, because Bakura has 4 of these, I will only be stalled for 1 turn. And these are basically just damage resist awakenings. So going back to the list over here. So Skillbind resist, I talked about that. These are just flat stat boosts. These are stat resists. I believe they're like 3% each or something. I could be wrong about them. But yeah, it's a small amount. I don't, maybe it's 1%, but I might need another source on that one. These time extend ones are useless. They basically, you need like 4 of them. No, I think you need like 8 of them to get like half a second worth or something like that. Or it's like, yeah, you need a lot of them. It's a waste of slots, honestly. This auto recovery thing, it scales off of your card's recovery, not your team's. And it's not a fixed 1000 like the regular awakening is. This is also kind of a waste. I'd be wary of having to use them. These killers over here, they multiply your card's damage versus that type by 1.5 times. There are restrictions on what kind of cards can get these killers depending on what attribute they are. Balanced cards can get every single one of them, but you'll know what you can feed to what monster depending on what you're running. These things over here are super stat resists. They give a little bit more resistance than these things, and they are slightly more effective. So for example, if each of these are giving, if each of the ones at the top give 1% status resist each, the ones at the bottom will give 2.5% each, something like that. And as for these ones, these are also more flat stat boosts. And as for these ones are endgame viable awakenings. Where this is a jammer surge resist, where you basically enemies will try to debuff you by giving you jammer or poison skyfalls. These ones, just by having one on your team, although that takes up 6 slots, it will clear up the entire thing for you. And as for this one, if monster tries to swap you around, there are monsters that do leader swaps where for a fixed certain amount of turns, your main card gets swapped with a sub card randomly, like 1 of 4. Yeah, so it's kind of RNG. Endgame dungeons tend to do this, and if your sub card that you're swapped out with has a low stats or a multiplier that is not very endgame viable, then you might be in a pickle. So in that case, you might want to be running one of these on your team. For this thing, there's also going to be monsters that have void damage pierce, which is void damage. So if your card attacks it with a certain amount of damage that goes beyond its threshold, then that damage will be negated to 0. But if you have this card, this is more for rainbow teams, but if you have this on a card and then you attack with all 5 attributes and healing at the same time, then that card will pierce that void and deal full damage to it. And the reason why this is so important is because rainbow teams typically don't have the luxury of being able to make 3x3 squares of its main attribute. So this is when slapping 1 or 2 of these cards on your top 2 damage dealers can make a difference on whether you can clear the dungeon or not. This thing, it bypasses attribute absorbs. It has its uses, but the way that the damage works on a team is basically, if you have 6 units in a team, like so, the way that the damage is dealt to the enemy is from the top row going to the right and then the bottom row going to the right. So if you have a 6 monster over here with 2 attributes, if you have the attribute absorbed negating lighten on this specific card, then this sub attribute might be enough to kill the enemy. Because sometimes if this final attribute gets absorbed, then the enemy's boss HP, if it was like this, then would go down all the way and then it would jump back slightly over here. And this is oftentimes when an enemy's enrage threshold is, and you might just get 1 shot off of that. So yeah, the most viable use case of that Latent Awakening is to put it on the last card. But you'd have to coordinate with a friend, or you'd have to use your own card for that one. So it's kind of messy to use, truth be told. And the last ones are, this is somewhat similar, in a similar vein. This is for damage absorb, where if you basically make a blob, I believe, then it goes over damage absorb enemies. Avoids damage absorption when the create combo orbs awaken skill is activated. Do note that the card that this goes on has to have the combo orb awakening as well. You can't just slap it onto any other card. And for these 2 things, I have very mixed feelings about them. So the one on the right is roulette recovery. One on the left reduces roulette status by 1 turn for each unlocked recover bind awoken skill. This thing is gonna get buffed in a future patch. It already did get buffed in Japan. Though in its current state, it's pretty much unusable. And as for this one, unmatchable orb recovery reduces unmatchable orb status by 1 and for each 2-prong attack awoken skill when the skill is used twice by the same attribute. Keyword being twice. I believe this one also gets buffed in Japan. But yeah, I have one comment from a viewer. Nice to see a beginner's guide. I find that when I try to bring friends in the pad, they often quit due to the lack of direction provided. Yeah, that's like when people get started with pad, there's actually so much information thrown at them. Like honestly, even though I've been talking for like almost 2 hours at this point, I still feel like I only covered the tip of the iceberg. And that's a bit of a problem. So I'll be adding chapters for specific sections later on. I don't really plan on tackling in-game mechanics such as orb movement and comboing. I'll do a brief section on that, but because there's so many videos on that, I don't feel like I should be covering that because I'm kind of going to be regurgitating the same information over and over again. But for everything else, I want this guide to be comprehensive enough so that if I were to show a person a card, then they would be able to understand what it would do and how they might be able to fit it into a team. That's basically the kind of overview that I want to give with this tutorial. So thank you for dropping by, and I hope your friends can also benefit from this guide as well. In the next section after the awakenings is the limit break. So what limit break does is sometimes you're going to run into cards where they have I'll just show it off with Araragi actually. So I have Araragi. So this guy, I'm just gonna take him to max level. So I'm just gonna feed him off Snow Globe. For newer players, I wouldn't really recommend this because I just kind of overshot this EXP. There's wastage there. But on certain cards, you will see that there's level max is indicated with a blue level, with blue text. And in this case, you can also see on the card when you go into it, where the level max, the max portion is listed in blue. And the max level 99 is also listed in blue. In this case, this card is eligible to be limit broken. So what this means is if I were to feed it a super snow globe, wait, but first, before I show anything off, please internet, thank you. I want to get its awakenings up to max. And I also want to give it plus 297 just for demonstration purposes. Now, what this can do is if I were to go to limit breaking, awakening, limit breaking. So this is basically what its stats would be after a limit break. So what a limit break does is it raises the maximum level a card can be from level 99 to 110. In which case it will gain a bunch of stats based on its base stats. It will be a multiplier. Not all limit breaks are the same. There are some limit breaks that grant up to like 35% of a monster's base stats as bonus stats. This level of stat bonus is typically found on monsters that are on older cards that are getting buffed after its release, like after a very long time, to keep up with more meta cards and the test of time. But on newer cards, you're typically going to see limit break awakenings of roughly 15% stat bonuses each. So yeah, and the reason why this is important is you only have to do it once for now. In Japan, there's gonna be another tier of limit breaking where you go to 120, but that's for another video for endgame players later on. But in the case of Araragi, so what happened after I limit broke him is I got this access to a super awoken skill. So this 10th section app opens up after you limit break a card. And the way that you re-roll this awakening is you have to feed it 297s continually until you get the one that you want. Yeah, so there's gacha within a gacha. So let's say, for example, on this Araragi card, I want to go for the skill boost plus, because in today's meta where a lot of cards are transforming cards, it helps to have a lot of skill boosts so that their transformation actives come up earlier. So in this case, I'm going to go into Super Awakening, Araragi. I'm going to use 297 points to reroll the Super Awakening. So yes, it is literally a roulette. And I didn't get it the first time, so I got damage resist. So that means I just have to roll it again. Now, the one saving grace of rerolling Super Awakenings is the fact that you can't get the same one twice. So now, because I have the Jam Resistance Awakening, my chance of getting the Super skill boost is now a 2-1, because the only other one that I can get is the Super Blind Awakening. Like so. Like, even though the Jammer Awakening shows up in the roulette, you will not be able to roll the same Super Awakening twice. But because I rolled the Super Blind one, that doesn't mean that I can't roll the Jammer one again. So now it's another 50-50 chance where I just have to keep rolling until I get my skill boost. So I got Jammer again. So as you can see, this can be a huge sink of pluses. I wouldn't really recommend gambling with them with the amount that you got from the story mode, because you only really have enough to enhance like 10 monsters. So I'd say hold off on them. It's fine to unlock the first one and just build around that until you get an easier way of getting pluses. But for the time being, yeah, I wouldn't really recommend gambling on those. There are other events and stuff like that give you pluses, whether it be from the Pal Egg machine through Pal Points, which you can accumulate by using different friend leaders, or through events. There's also monthly quest dungeons that also give you a fair share of Pal Points and pluses as well. And if you do ranking dungeons, then they might give you pluses as well. So there's a bunch of different sources for them, and there's also dungeons you can run as well. I'll go into the different resources in this game and where you can get them at a later section in the video. But for the time being, yeah, that's basically how limit breaking works and how Super Awakenings work as well. And these Super Awakenings are typically more valuable than regular Awakenings because they usually end up having because they give you the flexibility of being able to choose what you want. Granted, you can keep rerolling them, but Yeah, if you don't have multiples of the same card and you want to swap them between different teams using different super awakens, get ready to drain your pluses really fast. So that's one of the reasons why keeping dupes is always handy. So if you have multiple cards, multiple of the same card, then you can basically have different super awakenings on each card, and then you can basically just swap them out as needed. So the next section is, yeah, so these are necessary for super awakenings, and B, that's weird. And the next thing is, how do I improve my units? So now that I've given you a basic overview on how all the units work and what everything means, and oh, I guess I should have also talked about cost and EXP. So different monsters have different EXP curves, but most of them will most of the collab units you find will typically have a max EXP level of 4 million XP. So if you feed a 4 million XP, then you'll have it bang on at the 99 level mark. There are some more expensive units where its EXP curves can range from 5 million to 10 million to 50 million to 50 million. It really depends. Typically, reincarnation evolutions will have higher EXP limits, and super reincarnations will also have even higher level limits to it. And there's also the fact that limit breaking a card basically increases its EXP cap by another 50 million. So there are huge EXP sinks in this game. Though for Super Awakenings, you only have to limit break it. You don't have to get it to a certain EXP level threshold. So yeah, that level of extra stats is only really beneficial to the endgame players that are really min-maxing their teams. But for the most players, yeah, just dropping a snow globe on a unit, super snow globe unit on a unit that's available for limit breaking. Mind you, not all units are available for limit breaking. Just to get access to the Super Awakening, that is my recommendation. And as for the team cost, you have a maximum team cost. It's represented over here under total cost. Now the thing about this is team cost used to be a lot more valuable back in the days, but then okay, this is a little bit irrepresentative, so let me just, yeah. So this total cost, as you can see for endgame players like me, is absurdly high. But for newer players, it used to be a lot lower, but then because there's been a lot of QL changes over the years where new players are getting more free box spaces and more team costs, it's mostly irrelevant to work with nowadays, especially because assist equips actually don't count towards your total team cost, and nor does your friend. So because you don't really have to worry about those, yeah, total cost is really easy to keep down. And there's also the fact that if you get Pad Pass, you also get this badge where you get +3 extra seconds of movement time, and you also get infinite total cost. So it's more of a little bonus thing for newer players. I personally run Pad Pass badge just so I can have that extra level of security. But for most endgame players, they're either going to be running a badge that increases their team HP, recovery, possibly no Skyfall, or possibly even a skill boost depending on what kind of team they have. But yeah, you're gonna want to try to be able to play around not having time extension badges. Though it's a work in progress though. Like I wouldn't expect anyone to be able to like combo full boards in under 9 seconds. Though I would expect you to get to that point eventually. Like it's more or less a guideline for later on. Because especially with leaders nowadays coming with because even for this team, it has 11 seconds of movement time just from the units that are in it, and this isn't really including my friends pairing as well, because sometimes leaders also have additional movement times built into their leader skills. So that might be a little bit of a crutch that might help you out. Or in case of Fasca, where she transforms and gives you 2 extra seconds of movement time because of her awakenings. There's also cases like that as well. I forget if it's 2 or 4 seconds, but it's a lot. So yeah, that's team cost and total awakenings. Okay, so in terms of how do I improve my units, we can go over here. So there's the power of fusion. You would typically use this for either skilling up your units with P's and stuff like that. This is basically the generic I want to feed things to my unit kind of move. The thing about this is, technically speaking, you can do evolutions with power up fusions as well if you know the correct monster combinations. That's actually how we used to evolve units back in the day before we got this tab. Like for example, I want to evolve Araragi to quasi-vampire human Koyomi Araragi. If I were to go into my box and feed Koyomi Araragi these monsters in no specific order, then he will evolve into this form. And same with this assist evo. So that's basically how it works. Do note that alt evos are reversible, so you don't have to be worried about not being able to swap back to a different form. The only form of evo that is not reversible are reincarnated and super reincarnation evos. So do watch out for those, and I would not recommend reincarnating or super reincarnating your one-ofs just yet. Perhaps it might be the key that you need to farm up a super important dungeon. In that case, just go for it. But for most cases, yeah, you want to be careful with the way that you reset those evolutions. There is a way to reverse them coming in it's already in Japan, I believe. That's gonna make its way over to North America, though it's not exactly a cheap option, so I would be careful with it. Because what that thing does is it resets your card to its base form completely at a cost of a hefty amount of monster points. So power fusion is basically the go-to thing that you're typically gonna want to do. So as for extra enchantments, skill of fusion, you can also do this in the typical fusion way. It's just that the benefit of using this button over here is that it narrows down your skill up options into just a handful of things instead of having to search for them. Granted, if you already have a system for scaling up units, then you don't really need to rely on this option. Plus enhancement, because of the plus bank, this is going to be the primary way that you give pluses to your units. Back in the days, we didn't have this kind of plus bank over here, so we would just store units. We would store pluses by spamming them on like cheap units with like plus 297 on each of them, and then whenever there's a unit that we wanted to work on, we would just feed it over into the unit that we were working on. But that eventually ended up in a lot of wastage in case of monsters going over 297 and stuff like that. But now that we have a plus bank, we can just give a 297 to the exact state, to the exact stat that we wanted to. Oh yeah, also back in the day, there were cases where you could have too many like health pluses and too many attack pluses and not enough recovery pluses. Yeah, those types of pluses used to matter in the past, but not anymore. So that's one of the QL changes that happened. Awakening, you can actually directly feed Tamadras to your card to the same effect. It's just that if you use this Awakening tab, you can actually just if you use this Awakening tab, you can go into a unit and you can just do full Awakening and you feed all these Tamadras at the same time, instead of having to feed 5 Tamadras to it and then 4 Tamadras in a second batch. It just saves a little bit of time. It's a QOL thing. Latent Awakening, this is the only way you can apply most Latent Awakenings to your base cards as normally. The only difference is if you wanted to use a Latent if you wanted to use one of these Latent Tamadras extra slots, where it increases your maximum amount of latent slots you can have on your card by 1 each. This is typically an option available for reincarnated evolutions. If you want to use these, you cannot feed it to a monster directly. You have to use the latent Tamadra option. So that's pretty much the only thing that you can own. That's pretty much the only Latent Awakening fusion that you can only do from this tab. Everything else you can just feed it normally. Level limit breakthrough, you don't really need to use this tab either. You can just feed a super snow globe unit to a level 100 not 100, level 99 unit, provided that they can level limit breakthrough. Otherwise you might just end up using it for moot. So if you're a new player, I would recommend using this tab just in case you might accidentally feed it to something that you might not need to, because monsters that you cannot limit break will not show up as an option over here. And this is basically how you reroll Super Awakenings. You're going to be spending a lot of time here, just as a warning. But yeah, don't be too scared of it. Embrace it. Trust me. It's like the little thing that I showed with Araragi is statistically unlikely. Like you won't be that unlucky in most cases. So yeah, don't worry too hard about it. Most of the times you're expected to get it within that. Like if you have 3 different awakenings, you're expected to spend like around 1,000 plus points for 3. No, it's actually slightly less than 1,000, but like the math gets a little bit complicated. But yeah, you're expected to spend around that much, but it's not as bad as is not as bad as I make it out to be. So don't worry about it too much. So safe units you can feed are snow globes, metal, and jewel dragons. So over in this tab, I'm going to show it on the enhanced tab. This is basically a stash of monsters that are basically meant to be fed to your units to increase its stats, basically. So over here, you can see there's king tans, which are for skill ups. There's peas for skill ups. There's tans, which act as skill up materials for certain cards, or if you trade 5 of these, you can get a king tan of its respective attribute. Actually, I don't even think you have to be of the same attribute. I think you can just okay, it has to be of the same attribute. So for example, if you go into the trade tab and you just do this, come on, give me the trade. So for 5 tans, I can get a king tan, and like I mentioned before, if you feed a king tan with 4 other, if you feed a king tan of the correct attribute that it's being fed to, with 4 other monsters with the same skill, then the skill up will be guaranteed for the 4 other attributes. I mean, for the 4 other cards. Yeah, so the card that you're feeding to are going to get 4 skill ups, basically. I described it terribly. Anyways, and as for the other things, so these jewel dragons, sapphire dragons, they are safe to feed. This should be sorted by CHR. So these metal dragons, gold dragons, these jewel dragons, they are all safe to feed. Snow globes are safe to feed. Like these guys in the middle, you can see through my cursor. And these guys are all safe to feed. Snow globes are all safe to feed. Mini snow globes are safe to feed as well. These, I do keep some of the collab materials just as just for funsies. Extreme King Metal Dragon, this guy is also an enhanced material, and he's also sometimes used as an evolution material as well. So I wouldn't use up all of them. I would keep a couple of these handy. These 2 units are endgame farmable enhancing units. They can also be sold for gold, or in the case of Rainbow Dragon, they can be sold for 50 million EXP. These are not very accessible for newer players, but just keep that in mind if you run into them through like a bonus event or something like that. That is basically how you're supposed to use them. Though I would hold on to them in a lot of cases in case you have to feed a monster that has an extremely high EXP curve. Yeah, because there's a good chance that if you feed a monster with a Rainbow Metal Dragon, then it could turn into super or a great. So that could be like 75 million or 100 million extra. 75 million or 100 million EXP with this single unit. And you really don't want to waste it, so just hold on to it in most cases. Peas are also falling into the enhancement category for skill ups. And tans, king tans, yada yada yada. You'll also encounter these pengdras, these moldras, and these different variations of pengdras. These things you can just feed off to your unit or just sell, because these things don't stack compared to the other enhancement materials. Like over here you can see that it's like times 5. Granted, I don't have any dupes over here. Oh, I do. Yeah, so I have 2 amethyst pengdras, and they don't stack, and they can take up a lot of inventory space, so it's in your best interest to just feed them away as soon as possible to save some of your space. And because they're buried so far in here, you might not realize where your inventory space is getting clogged up from as a new player. So just be sure to check your enhancement material box just in case. Because as you clear technical dungeons, you will get a lot of these. Like a lot of these. Like almost every floor is going to probably drop 1 or 2 of them. Like every time you run dungeon with these, you're probably going to get like a handful of them. So just be on the lookout for them. So yeah, those are the safe units that you can feed. You're also gonna get random dungeon drops. Clear this. Go back to my regular sort. You will get random drops from dungeons for harpies, slimes, and stuff like that. You can sell them because oftentimes they don't give enough EXP to be worth the gold cost. As for regular dungeon drops, yeah, a lot of trash floors can be sold off. Do be careful of the things that do be careful of the bosses because sometimes they can be traded in for jewels, or the mini bosses they can be sent in for jewels as well. And those are like not jewels, gems. For example, like indigo, basil, and these kind of units. So these monsters can be exchanged for gems, and gems are critical for evolutions for your monsters. So you're gonna want to hoard as many of them as possible. They do stack in your inventory, and they only take up one slot. So it's in your best interest to gather as many of them as possible. I've amassed this collection. It's not as much as some of the other whales have. This is actually like just a bare minimum for a mid-game player, honestly. But this is basically a collection that I've gotten over just hoarding them, kinda. Like, you will get a natural stream of resources as you play the game through events and pallet machines and stuff like that. And later on, the endgame dungeons will sometimes have them as trash floor drops as well. So once you get to a certain point, there's a low chance that you're gonna have to farm for them yourself. But yeah, they only take up one inventory slot, so don't sell them off or anything like that. Just hold on to them. You're gonna need them. So save King Tamadras for units with 9 awakenings. So there's this monster called the King Tamadra, which can substitute for Tamadras. So what this card does is it unlocks all the base monsters' awoken skills, and because 9 is a maximum, you're gonna want to use this on them. This does not affect Super Awakenings. Super Awakenings are only unlocked through pluses and not Tamadras. So just save them for monsters with yeah. So just save these for monsters with 9 awakenings that you haven't unlocked yet. And another fun thing about Super Awakenings is you don't need to have the 9 base awakenings unlocked to unlock Super Awakenings. You can actually have only the Super Awakening so long as you limit break the card and you give it its needed pluses. So yeah, there are 2 separate mechanics, even though they both grant similar bonuses. Save Ps for units that don't have easily accessible skill ups. By this I mean, like I mentioned before, in the Monogatari collab, if you run the dungeon for 50 stamina, you can skill up to 5 cards at the same time. That's a lot more stamina efficient than using Ps on cards that you already have. Though if the event is over, then you have no choice but to skill it up with Ps. But while we have the event, make the most use out of it, and then just skill up all the cards that you need. Same thing for King Tans. Usually there's gonna be event bosses. In this case, Kiss Shot can't be skilled up with King Tans. She has to be used as a sub in your party for you to get skill ups with her. But it's okay. But in other dungeons where you have bigger bosses like Kyozan Site, where you can have monster skill up levels of up to level 51. In these cases, you're gonna want to farm multiple copies of this card, and then you're gonna want to use King Tans to skill it up. I'm not sure about the specifics of cards like this where they have no primary attributes, but that's more of an endgame thing to consider. But for most dungeon bosses, they will have like, for example, this is the Evangelion, one of the monsters for it, with a max level of 10, with the max possible skill up of 10. So for this guy, you could basically just use 3 different King Tans. 3 Dark King Tans and 10 copies of this card, and then you can basically skill up to full. That's basically just one way to do it. And yeah, though it's not as rare as they used to be, Ps can still be a pain to farm up. There is an event coming up where we have the Gung Ho collab, I believe, or that is another excellent opportunity to farm up a ton of Ps. In that case, I would recommend that you save some magic stones, because that's probably going to be one of the most accessible and most stamina efficient ways for you to get Ps, because arena team building can be a little bit of a tricky thing later on, for now, until you get more of a fleshed out monster box. So what the next section is, how do I improve my teams? Now, how to improve my team, it really depends on the type of dungeon. It really helps to know what's coming up to build around it. And there are resources out there where they explain to you how a dungeon is going to go. Like Puzzle Dragon X is like a pretty decent database where it has a lot of dungeon information. A lot of its older dungeon informations are accurate, though it may be lagging slightly behind when it comes to newer dungeons. But yeah, as a reference tool, it is a great site. There's also more accurate and more up-to-date Japanese sites. You might need to use a translator for them, like Sky Ozora, but it's an option to consider later on. But for the time being, when you team build, because you don't really have too many options, I'm just gonna say that there's some basic things that you should look out for. So as a general rule of thumb, make sure that your team has the following. So survivally on the first floor, make sure you either have skills ready or you're tanky enough for the first tour, or you have the ability to stall until you can get your skills ready for the following floors. So it would suck if you just enter the dungeon and then you just get hit with a preemptive and you just die on the first floor. That's embarrassing. You don't want that to happen to you. So make sure that your team is either tanky enough or you have ways of getting around it. This isn't necessarily only exclusive to the first floor, but the second floor as well. If in the case of a second floor hazard like that, then you're going to want to be able to have a team that's tanky enough to stall on the first floor safely, so without accidentally killing the enemy monster. And yeah, basically being able to stall as long as you possibly need to. A lot of endgame teams are viable of such a stalling tactic, though a lot of early game teams that you might build, like yeah, there are a lot of units where their tankiness and their damage are kind of linked together, in which case you wouldn't be able to stall for them properly. But in those cases, you're probably not going to be transforming too many cards, so it's a little bit of a different scenario. Stalling part is more important for cards like not Combatter, in the most recent collab, Nadeko. Because her active skill is on a turn cooldown of 20, and you have to use this skill to basically change into her ultimate form, which is what you want to run. But yeah, the team building becomes a lot more complicated once you try to incorporate transforming monsters into your team, because you want to have as many skill boosts as possible to get the transformation up as early as possible. And because if you look at her leader skill, it halves damage with 2+ wood combos, and she doesn't have a natural HP multiplier or anything like that. So she's extremely vulnerable in her pre-transformation state, and she's extremely valuable in her post-transformation state. So because of cases like this, in case of Nadeko teams, you want to have 20 skill boosts on the first turn, or have a way to haste up Nadeko so that they can transform on the first turn. So yeah, so skill boosts in transforming teams are the number one priority you have to make up for. And I guess this is another mechanic that I should have really talked over earlier during the unit overview section. But yeah, there are certain cards with a change button on the top left. This change button basically just shows what it becomes after it uses its active skill. And these transforming cards will generally have an active skill cooldown of 18 turns, 20 turns, 25 turns, or 30 turns, I believe. Or in some rare cases, 35 turns in the case of Chris as well. Whoops. Yeah, 35 turns. The 35 turns is on the upper end of the spectrum of things, but in most cases, your transforming cards are going to be in the 18, 20, 25 turn range. Yeah, those three ranges. So yeah. So that's transforming in a nutshell. And so yeah, survivability for the first floor, ability to stall, resistances to major annoyances or ways to deal with them. So for example, orb converters, resist awakenings, equips, skills that override debuffs. So by this I mean resistances. So we do have awakenings to deal with resistances. That's not a good example. So if I were to filter, so for example, monsters might inflict blind on you, where your entire board is blinded and you have to swipe to uncover it. Or they might do a super blind on you, where a blinded orb might have a turn timer on it, and no matter what you do to it, unless you clear it, the blind is not going to go away. In that case, you're gonna have to memorize what kind of orb is blinded. You can always check what type of orb it is by just pressing on it and not moving it. So you can just memorize a few key positions of orbs and then just clear them as you go. Or there's also jammer and bomb attacks, where jammer orbs are basically a null. Like, they don't hurt you or anything. Bombs do hurt you if you're not matching them at the end of your turn. But they might be able to break the activation of your leader skill. Like, for example, if you're running a rainbow team and then your damage multiplier relies on you. Actually, for an easier example. For example, on Raijin, 2 times HP for attacker type, 18 times attack when 4 plus attributes attack, reduces damage and inflicts 1 damage with 4 plus linked light orbs. So if an enemy were to convert all my light orbs on my board into jammer orbs, then there's a good chance that if the following turn has a strong preemptive hit, then I might die to it because I don't have the shield from the 4 plus linked light orbs, even though I might be able to take it down using the 4 other attributes by hitting it with RBG and D. So red, blue, green, and dark attributes. So I could kill the monster, but I might die on the next turn, so it's not really recommended. I go without my light orbs. And in that case, I might want to bring in an orb converter. Or like an orb converter, like Raijin herself generates all attributes and heal. So in that case, there's 2 different ways to go about it. So I can have an orb converter that can either change my full board. I can have an orb converter that might spawn a couple of light orbs in a certain like randomly, like so, like removes orb blocks and creates 4 light orbs at random. Do note that these RNG type orb generators might actually break activations of other skills. Like if I have only 3 fire orbs on the board and then I use this thing and it blocks off one of them, then there's a good chance that I might not be able to activate my leader skill again, even though I have 4 light orbs. So there's cases like that to consider. Or there's also the fact that you could just bring one of these, or you can bring 5 of these to the same effect, and you can just resist them completely. Do note that these do not work when your awoken skills are bound. So having a cleric type ability where you can clear your awoken bind skills is very important. Those are especially prevalent in endgame dungeons where sometimes you might be awoken bound and bound on the same turn. In those cases, you're going to want to bring a bind clearer of your own, and no amount of resistance bind plus is going to save you. So in those cases, yeah, you're going to want to just bring your own cleric abilities, active skills. And then there's also the poisons. Do note that these do not affect Skyfall debuffs that you are going to get. For the Skyfall debuffs, you're going to want to get the 6-slot Surge Awakenings. So you're going to want to take a look at the dungeon and see what kind of hazards are going to be along your way. And there are cases where there's some hazards that don't really matter if they're on your board or not. Like jammers and poisons are generally pretty easy to work around. The regular blinds are also really easy to work around. It's just that sometimes poisons aren't. Because poisons and super poisons scale off of your max team HP. So if you have a team with high HP and high defense, but then it turns out that you don't have a way to recover all of that HP easily, poisons can mark the end of your run. It is very possible for that to happen, and in those cases, you're definitely going to want to bring orb converters that convert away poisons, and or poison resist awakenings and equips. So for those kind of teams, it's going to be very important. There's not only that, but there's also skills that basically enemies will try to give you debuffs, whether they be like reducing the amount of total movements time you have, or making sure that your damage is reduced by a certain amount, like a certain percentage. In those cases, using a buff or debuff of a similar type, like for example, if you have orb debuff or movement time debuff, if you use an orb time buff on yourself, you can flip it around and you can override the buff completely. So similar types of buffs and debuffs will override each other. Consequently, if an enemy buffs your movement time by like 1 second for 10 turns, and then you use a skill like if you use a skill like Senjo Gahara. If you use a skill like her where she reduces your movement time by 1 second, she will override the buff that the enemy gave you with the -1 move time for 1 second. But this is more useful for cases where a monster might reduce your movement time by like 75%, and you might only have like 3 seconds to solve a board. And those kind of cases can get kind of hairy. So in those cases, it might help to have Senjogahara, where instead of going down to 3 seconds, your movement time, it might only go down to 11 seconds. And that is a lot more manageable for a 6x5 board. Or for any board, actually, for that matter. So yeah, especially because Senjogahara is on a 1-turn cooldown, having low cooldown refreshers for debuffs like that are very handy to have, because in the late game dungeons, it's very possible for you to get debuffs like almost back to back, and you're going to want to be able to have short quick actives to deal with them as soon as possible. So resistances to major annoyances, and there's also things like roulette orbs, where you could have a roulette orb on the board where it's in a very uncomfortable space, or there could be too many roulette orbs on the board at the same time, where roulette orb is basically after a certain period of time, it changes its orb type into the next one in a rotation, where red becomes blue, blue becomes green, green becomes light, light becomes dark, dark becomes heart, heart becomes red, and any of the hazards that fall into roulette orb become a fire orb. Well, in those cases, sometimes the roulette is too fast for you to work with properly, and it might help to replace the roulette with a roulette of your own that is a lot more easy to manage. So for example, if we have a case of Mikage, creates 1 roulette orb at random lasting for 3 turns, changes the top orbs lasting for 3 turns, blah blah blah. But the thing about this roulette orb is it's a lot more easy to control. Like, there are some roulettes that basically rotate its type every like half a second, but this one rotates like every second or so you can actually use roulette orbs to your advantage to create orbs that you need. So there's other creative ways to use roulettes like that, or sometimes there's enemies that just like turn half of your board into like a roulette fiesta, and then you might not be able to work around it properly unless you override it with your own roulette. So yeah, there's ways to use these kinds of tools in various situations. In a lot of the older dungeons that you'll be running, you will not encounter new mechanics like roulettes and stuff like that. This is more for the end game, just to have some things to consider, you know? So it has to have full resist for mid-game content, but you need to plan individually for each endgame dungeon respectively. Yeah, because like I mentioned before, like blinds and jammers aren't really mandatory to basically build around, and there's some leader skills that also negate poison damage as well. But it helps to have super blind resist for the super blinds. Because those ones, like if there is a monster called Lilith, sometimes when she appears, she can convert your whole board into sticky blinds, which are basically the ones with a timer on them, where no matter what you do to them, the blind doesn't go away unless you like refresh the board or clear the orbs yourself. In that case, you wanna try to resist those. But for typical jammers, bombs, and normal blinds, you don't really have to work around them. It's just more of a quality of life thing. So that's more of something that you might want to bring, especially as newer players, because a lot of the early arenas end up spamming those at you as the main form of annoyance. The more annoying things come later on, where monsters kind of just like throw roulettes at you and then also have like incredible tankiness so that you can't really kill them in 1 turn. But yeah, for the most part, for the dungeons that you're going to be encountering in like the next month or so, it would help to have resist of each of them. Just be sure of what you can work around as a player and what your team can deal with in terms of just straight numbers. So it helps to have full resist for making content, but you need to plan individually end game dungeons, because you don't have the freedom of bringing so many resist awakenings due to the fact that many floors need specific counters. Yeah, for the far end game dungeons, you actually don't have the luxury of running all these resists at the same time at all, because you end up running short on awakening slots for your either your base card or for your assists. And for these cases, you're definitely gonna wanna plan it separately. And a lot of these cases, you're gonna wanna build around them, assuming you have basically near perfect control of your board and assuming that player skill is not going to be a factor for this kind of endgame content. Now what's the next section? And on top of having the resists and ability to deal with annoyances, you're going to want to have core damage dealers. So these units are going to be focused on dealing damage, a lot of damage. In some cases, it's common to have monsters with like 4 of these 7C awakenings, or maybe 2 of these 7C awakenings and 1 of these 10 combo. Like, yeah, those kind of, or they can also have like a combination of these along with a void damage piercer. Or in a case of Raijin, you can also have like a bunch of 7Cs and a bunch of TPAs. But these kind of monsters are the majority of their awakenings are going to be focused on just dealing straight damage. They're not going to have utility in them at all, much or if at all. And they have 1 roll and 1 roll only to basically just hurt the crap out of whatever it comes into. So in a lot of these times for monocolor teams, your main damage dealers are typically going to have void damage piercers. There are other cases where that might not be the case, where in case of a Gillian team, Gillian himself is a major damage dealer with 4 7Cs, but he doesn't have void damage piercer. So in case of a monster that shows up with a void damage, that's when monsters like Grandis with its own pair of VDPs and 7Cs, he's going to be the one to deal with them instead. So he is the core damage dealer for void damage types, and Gillian is the main damage dealer for everything else. So there are cases where there's 2 different types of damage dealers on your team. Though for most cases, monocolor teams will definitely have void damage piercers on their main damaging cards. Follow-up attack, it's not necessary, but it's not necessary for some endgame dungeons, but it's very handy to have in most cases. So by follow-up attack, I mean this awakening over here, where if you have a column of heal orbs, you deal 1 extra damage when matching a column of heal orbs. So the reason why void damage attack is important is because a lot of times enemies or boss monsters can spawn with resolve. What it means is if its HP is above a certain point before it is attacked, when its HP is dropped down to 1, it will not die, it will stay at 1. And because a lot of these like enemies have like thresholds where they unleash their like execute attacks if their HP drops at a certain point, it could be a dangerous thing if you don't have follow-up attacks to basically finish it off, if you don't have the proper damage control to deal with it. Because nowadays in most teams, there's almost never a case where you do damage control to bring a card to a certain threshold, except for a very specific set of units and bosses. So in most cases, you're going to want to bring your own ability of following up attack. So follow-up attack comes in multiple different forms. One is through the bonus attack, and the other form is through super follow-up attack. Hi Hunter, welcome back. In this form, where you make a 3x3 square of heal orbs to boost your attack and inflict 99999 damage at the end of your turn, or you could have a follow-up attack built into your leader skill. For example, in the case of Raijin, if you match 4 light orbs, 4 or more light orbs, you will deal 1 extra damage at the end of your turn. Like, there's different ways to get follow-up attack built into your kit. It's highly recommended that you have at least 1 leader that has it, just as a form of convenience. Or it might not even be a case of convenience in a lot of cases, because sometimes it's really hard to fit in follow-up attacks while activating your leader skill. Like, for example, if your team is based off of doing row damage and you have a follow-up attack, you cannot have rows and follow-up attacks at the same time, because you can't have a column and a row together on a board without it overlapping. So you can have only one or the other. That's actually why the super follow-up attack actually came into play. But it helps a lot to have it in the case of row teams. Yeah, it helps to have it built into the leader skill in most cases. So yeah, bonus points if it's built into your unit's leader skill. Skill boosts to have your critical skills up in time. So the number of skill boosts is, you can tell at a quick glance how many you have on your team by clicking the team info right underneath your team. This overview basically gives you a total estimate of how much HP and how many awakenings you have. So this is one way to quickly verify if you have the right resistances for the content that you're about to tackle. And skill boost is over here. This does not factor into account the amount of skill boost your friend is bringing. So you're going to have to add that manually yourself. But it's literally adding like a single digit number, so you don't have to worry too much about it. I know math is hard. I know. But anyways, so yeah, you're going to want to bring skill boost to have your critical skills up in time. Namely for transforming units. Especially if your transforming unit has an extremely gimped form at the base like Nadeko does, where she can't really tank for herself or deal damage to clear enemies. In that case, yeah, you're definitely going to want to have enough skill boost to bring up her transformation on floor 1. As for latent awakenings to counter annoyances and the extra damage, that's more of a late game thing because those kind of latents can only be farmed through arenas. But after you unlock them and after you get comfortable with farming them, which is going to be months from now most likely, yeah, when you get to that point, you're going to notice a huge boost in your quality of life. And you're also going to find that you can actually run rainbow teams because without the void damage piercing latent awakening, it's kind of hard to run them. Yeah, this thing is extremely valuable. By the way, on Twitch it says you're farming Apex Legends. Thank you for that. Yeah. Thank you. Puzzle and Dragons. Okay, yeah. Yeah, thanks for the heads up. And and the next point of interest, now that I've talked about how do I improve my teams and stuff like that, I want to give a brief overview of how damage is calculated in this game because it's a very, very, very important. Where did I save this? Stream thumbnails. Okay. So this is basically how the damage of a card of a single combo match is calculated. Like the whole chart itself is jam-packed full of information. Let me just make it smaller. Transition. Okay, so there's three different ways that so there's basically three different separate formulas that you can basically use to estimate it. But the TLDR of it is, let me just move this out of the way a little bit. Yeah, the TLDR is basically orb enhancers, two-prong attacks, VDPs, and L unlocks affect the ticking number on your card as your combos get counted. So as a quick example, I can just show this off. Nope, not this. Oops. So for example, on this team, watch carefully. So over here. So watch carefully on my cards over here. There's, as I clear orbs, there's going to be a number that pops up on them, and it's going to increase every time I clear orbs of the same attribute. And so if I were to do this, so like over here, as the orbs are getting cleared, its sub attributes and stuff are going up. I have combo skip on, so that was a little bit fast, but basically, like, for every orb that I clear, a certain amount of its damage basically goes to my cards. It's not split, it's per card individually, and that is basically the first segment of this damage chart. This damage chart, you might want to take a screenshot of it. I didn't make it myself. I'll link it to its source after I dig it up again, because I have it saved on a picture on my file. But yeah, that's basically the first part of the damage calculation, and the second part of the damage calculation is basically based on the individual cards' awakenings and stuff like that. This is when the 7Cs and the 7Cs and the row bonuses and the takoyaki awakenings and that kind of stuff fall into play. And you can see an exact list of how each of these awakenings affect the card's total damage over here. This kind of information you can't really find within the game itself, so it's really handy to have a reference of something like this. Or you can just memorize it. As you get more comfortable with the game, you will end up memorizing it. And then after your card's stats are calculated, it gets followed up by the leader skill. So all of these things, you can see that there's a lot of multiplication. They all multiply with each other. So you can see how damage scaling can go quite crazy in this game. Like, for example, on cards with like 3000 base attack, because of the way that damage scaling works with leader skills, with combo boosts, with attribute boosts, it's not uncommon to find Nadeko teams that can cap out at the integer cap. So 2.147 billion damage per turn, with a combination of everything that's going on over here. Even though she has a base stat of like 3000. So she's basically getting a damage multiplier of like 600,000 or something like that. So so the damage scaling happens quite rapidly in this game, which is why it's so important to have core damage dealers that make use of these scaling multipliers effectively. The actual damage is a total of basically the sub damage per card multiplied by the killer, which is also another awakening. Like on Raijin, on Fujin, on the very far right hand side, you can see that there's a devil killer and a dragon killer. So versus dragons and devils, she actually deals 3 times damage. So for example, if I were to do this, so this 4994 damage ends up becoming multiplied, and then it gets reduced by the amount of defense it has. So that's kind of how it works. And then yeah, and this also affects how much damage you take with passives and awakenings as well. So there's a lot of multiplication going on. Though multiplication of the same type typically ends up additive for resistance types, but for offensive types, they all multiply with each other. So it's kind of something that you kind of learn as you play the game. Yeah, it's something that just comes with the game knowledge, but for the time being, that's it for the chart. I will have a link to that chart in the description once I found the source, because I have to give proper credits to it before I just throw it up there. As for how do I improve my teams, core damage dealers, and the next point of interest should be, should I grind for ranks? Now, this is more of an opinionated piece. 1 second. Let me transition this. So, should I grind ranks? Now, you're gonna have people in multiple parties saying that it's important to grind ranks because your maximum stamina benefits from having a higher limit if you stone for stamina. And this is especially true for whales that play the game a lot and are more likely to stone for stamina over time. For those guys, yes, it is worth grinding for ranks. But for the general player, it's really up to you. I try to minimize the amount of stamina that I waste for like no particular purpose. For me as an endgame player, my maximum stamina is 504. I regen stamina at a rate of 24. At a 20 per hour, like everyone does. So I have a leeway of 25 hours before I have to actually spend my stem if I were to burn through my entire bar. So I have a really big like safety net in case I just were to skip a day of playing or something like that. But this isn't necessarily the same case if you're a new player, because your stamina is going to be in like the double digits or low triple digits of that. In those cases, you're going to want to focus on, my personal recommendation is make sure you have enough stamina to last while you either work or primarily for when you sleep, and for how much you can go on without touching it because of work. Like for example, you might be able to play Puzzle and Dragons during break time. Or even one scenario would be like you fall asleep. Just before you fall asleep, you burn off your stamina. You wake up. You wake up to a full stamina bar. You just clear the dungeons as you're going about your daily routine during the morning, and then you go to work, and then it's about break time, and then you don't really have time to play the game right now, so you just enter a dungeon, you close the app, and you basically just quote unquote burnt 50 stamina for you to use later on. And then once you're on your daily commute, maybe you're on your bus, or maybe once you get home, you can start playing again. When you open up the app, you're going to find yourself within the dungeon that you entered during your office. And then you're also going to be... and because you entered that dungeon early, and because your stamina was technically burnt, you will continue regenerating stamina while you are still working during the second half of your shift. And like things like that. There's little tips and tricks you can do to basically just maximize the amount of stamina you can have. While minimizing the amount of time stamina is wasted. So I would advise, kind of planning around that. And there's also the fact that if you have very little time to play, like maybe you worked an overnight shift or you worked overtime and you don't have the energy to just burn through your stamina bar completely. In that case, if you don't want to waste your stamina, if you don't want to waste too much stamina, what you can do is basically run the daily dungeon for the stone that it's going to give you that costs like 10 stamina. And then what you can do is you can watch a video to refresh your stamina, and then you can basically end up waking up the next day with basically 2 stamina bars worth of stamina. And that's kind of the recommendation that I would have for a lot of people. And then maybe in the morning might be a little bit more fresh and your mental might be in a better state, and then you might be able to just burn off a bit more stam. So that's another thing that you could do as well. So just to put into reference, 1 hour is 20 stamina. So stamina regens at a rate of 1 every 3 minutes. And the other case to make up for higher, like just having like the scenario that I listed is something that you can perfectly do with if you have 120 stamina, assuming you get 6 hours of sleep. If you have 120 stamina, you can basically juggle it so that you don't really go over it. Granted, if you have 120 stamina, then there's a good chance that like any dungeon that you run might rank you up further. Though after you get to that 120 stamina point, I would recommend against grinding for it. Unless you're planning on whaling. If you're planning on whaling, then by all means just go ham. Because there's a because you get way more value if you're stoning at say 500 maximum or like 400 maximum stamina compared to 200 maximum stamina. Like the amount of stones you get are the same, right? It's just that you want to squeeze in double the value. So in those cases, you might want to grind for ranks. But in most other cases, you want to preserve your ranks because every rank up is basically a free stamina refill, and that's basically worth a stone in itself. So if you don't want to waste stamina, don't focus on grinding rank too much. If grinding ranks is a byproduct of you farming efficiently, then it's fine. Like it is what it is. So you don't have to worry too much about that. But I'm just saying, like, you shouldn't be grinding ranks to the point where you're wasting stamina, and yeah. So don't try to waste stamina. Team cost is also handy to have with higher tier badges. Oh yeah, there's higher tier badges that actually reduce the total amount of team cost you can have on your team. After a certain point, it becomes negligible because you already have like 4-digit stamina. So even if you get it reduced by like 400, you still have like another 500 something leeway in total cost you can use. But for earlier levels, it can make a difference. And for those cases, I would recommend having up to like 700 total cost. I don't know exactly what level you'd have to be to cross that threshold. But I'm assuming it would be somewhere around like the 400 to 500 rank mark. And by that time, you would also probably have like 200 something stamina. So there are certain cases where rank grinding is okay. There's also another case where you get a max team slot every 100 levels, every 100 ranks. So my next team slot is due at rank 1000. I'm not planning on grinding for it yet. You you also do get 5 extra team slots for having Pad Pass active. These do go away once your Pad Pass expires. But most of these extra team slots, like these 9 extra team slots that I have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. These extra team slots are ones that I gained by hitting every 100 rank milestone. So you basically technically only start off with like 6 rank slots, but 6 team slots, not rank slots. Yeah, 6 team slots. So that might be a little bit small to work with. But then again, you might not have too many teams to work on as well. But by the time you hit rank 200, you're going to have 8 team slots in total, and maybe 13 if you have Pad Pass as well. And that's a little bit more of a comfortable number to work with. But yeah, you do get an extra team slot every 100 levels, so that's something to look forward to. And there's also memorial gachas, which are gachas with special units. Well, not necessarily special units. They're gachas with specific unit pools that come from basically Godfests. And some of them only like the better ones at the higher ranks, they come with a pool of exclusively higher tier Godfest exclusives. And in those cases, it might be worth it to grind up for it if you're nearing a reset, because these memorial gachas do reset, and when they do reset, they reset for all the tiers. So for example, like the rank 100 memorial machine, the 200, 300, blah blah blah, all of them reset at the same time. In those cases, where you know that there's a refresh coming and you're like, say like rank 400, like 95 or something like that, then in those cases you might want to grind up to rank 500 so that you can get the memorial gacha right now and once again after the reset. Because memorial gachas, they don't have a cooldown. I mean, they don't have an expiry date per se. So if you were to get to that rank, no matter when they were introduced, you will get it. It's just that after you get it, you have to wait for a reset. But when a reset comes, it resets all of them at the same time. So yeah. So the best time to hit a certain rank threshold will be just before a reset. But yeah, especially if you're a higher level, like if you're nearing rank 900 or something like that, the memorial gacha for rank 900 and rank 1000 are going to be really good. So in those cases, you might want to start grinding. And also because after you get to like the rank 900s, most of your stamina refreshes are going to be done through stones anyways. Stones and videos. Stones, videos, and just waiting for them. Because the amount of EXP you need to level up it scales to ungodly amounts. Yeah. Like for example, while one experience of a lifetime might give a new player like 1,000 new ranks with its 300,000 EXP, for us, it's not even close to getting us a part of a rank up. So a lot of us are gonna end up, yeah, after you get to a certain point, you don't really have to worry too much about rank grinding. Like, it's encouraged actually, just so that you can get more value out of your stones. But it's very min-maxy at that point. So there's memorial gachas that you might want to grind towards, and we're nearing the end. So point number 8, my inventory is getting full. What can I sell? Please buy box space. Especially if you're getting a full inventory because of units that you've been pulling from the REM, the rare egg machine. You do not want to sell off any of them for the points that I mentioned before, because units from the REM typically get buffs over time, or buffs, new evolutions, new assist evolutions. You can give a glimpse of what's coming to us by taking a look at the Japanese server. Though it's only like a preview of like 2 or 3 months in advance. But yeah, typically whenever a collab or a seasonal event comes back, the core cards in those events and collabs will get buffs. And sometimes those buffs are significant enough to bring them back into the relevance. Other times it might not be, but you know, it's not worth risking it just in case you regret it later on. Box space is fairly cheap. You get 2 of it per day for free if you just watch a video. Or if you're just a whale and you just don't want to bother with it, you can just buy a pack and just get a whole bunch of box space for a fairly low price actually. So yeah, so just keep everything from the REM. As for the other type of inventory space, your friends list. You start off with a total of 50 friends list, 50 max friends. Streaming late today. Yeah, I want to get this video over with as soon as possible. Because I've been talking about beginner's guide for the past 3 hours, and I already have to put timestamps on it. But anyways, I digress. So you start off with a maximum of 50 friends, and when you start off the game, that might not be enough. Because the way that friends work is if you enter a dungeon. Wait, I can just show it off over here. So when you go into your teams, you will see this little indicators on the top beside your team where there's a circle, there's a triangle, and then there's a square for the currently active team. Not sure if on purpose, but your chat is not showing up on the screen. I purposely have it hidden away just in case I end up getting doxxed. So I can just trim that section out. So about these. So yeah, the circle one, your team 1 slot is reserved for basically if I enter a dungeon like this. I'm gonna see different shapes beside a person's name. So if a friend has a circle beside their rank over here, this means that this unit is under slot 1. If a unit has a triangle beside it, that means it's under slot 2. And if it has a square beside it, then that means it's in their currently active team slot. For normal friends, you will see monsters in the first slot and the ones in your currently active slot. So in this case, in this case, you're going to have 2 instances of Natiko showing up for your friends to use. And for non-best friends, you can basically use your friend once before the monster goes away. And the way that these friend units refresh is basically the friend has to get out of their app and go back in. And once the game registers as them relogging back in, their friends will be available for others to use again. WTF, I never actually knew that. I've been playing for 4 to 5 years. Yeah, it's it's honestly one of the things that Pad does poorly. It's just that, yeah, a lot of the game's mechanics aren't very clear from the get-go, so you end up relying on third-party helpers, and I'm glad that you actually learned something new today, Blue Cross. So that's basically how you can see what kind of a friend, what kind of units a friend has. And this is also kind of important because if you were to consider adding a best friend, you would probably want to consider adding them as a best friend for a unit that they're currently using, because that means that there's a very low chance that they might swap away from it. And what best friends do is basically it removes the restriction of you only being able to use their friends once before they relog. So in that case, some of my friends have, like, I will typically try to have different units in slots 1, 2, and 3 for my best friends, because I want my best friends to be able to use 3 different units instead of having the same duplicate unit over and over again. Can I join you for some co-op? Like, why are you explaining so much? The reason for this guide is because I wanted to make a comprehensive guide for new players, just in case they wanted to have one straight source of basically demystifying a lot of the beginner questions that people may have. Like, I will be timestamping the entire video for use later on, because there isn't like one generic guide that covers it all, basically. Or it's not even that, because there's so many guides out there that I kind of just want to use this guide to be a supplement. Like, there's a reason why I'm not going to be covering orb movement and stuff like that. So I just want to basically just give an overview of what cards are. Like, I had a little section like where you can get the app, what kind of resources you're introduced to at the start, how much IAP and stuff like that you need, how to understand what units do, how to improve units, how to improve my teams, if I should grind ranks, like those kind of common questions. I wanted to give an insight and my opinion on how to approach these topics. Is voice chat and co-op out of the question? No, it's not out of the question. I'm down to play with you, but just not this stream, because this stream I'm just focused on making an introduction video. So sorry about that. So yeah, just make sure that you don't sell off your rem units if you need more space. As a free-to-play player, as long as you keep watching the daily 2 videos, your box space should be growing at a faster rate than you can get stones to roll. So in that case, yeah, you should be fine. Do you have a best friend option left? I do, but I typically save it for the last minute in case I need a meta friend lead that I don't have, or maybe for a farming one. I have some leads you might want up. Because honestly, I got this is a bit of a tangent, but I also went off into, like, let me show you. I did a gacha stream on Monday where I did a bunch of rolls, and I ended up getting like 3 Naticos. And because I already have New Year's Artemis, I plan on building a team using the only units that I have and whatnot. I have everything non-Monogatari. Yeah, maybe I'll consider it for a later time, but for now I just want to get through this explanation. So the next section, this is section number 9. It's gonna be the second last section. So what do I do with X resource? So this is the common resources and where you can find them. So for coins, every time you swap an assist, they cost 1 million gold. Super awakenings also cost gold. So a lot of little functions in this game, including every time you merge a unit, it costs gold. So gold is gonna be a common So yeah, gold is used in a bunch of various different ways in small and large forms. How often does any servers get free stones? The thing is, any stream, like, there are people that keep track of their daily stones that they get as completely non-IAP players. I think the last tally was at least 3 stones per day on average because of major events like the anniversary one where we get 100 stones in a batch. But just to keep a safe number, I would say with today's events and stuff like that, just assume that you get roughly 2 stones a day. And everything else on top of that is basically extra. So to go with that, so yeah, coins are basically used everywhere. The way you can farm coins is basically just, there is a very new endgame dungeon that came out that can give you a ton of coins in Japan. It's not advisable to run for newer players because it's just going to be wasted stamina because the dungeon is extremely difficult. But for everyone else, there is the thing called the weekend dungeon. There's also Gold Mount Tricolor. The weekend dungeon, which is available on Saturdays and Sundays, and the Golden Mount Tricolor dungeon, which is available as a limited time dungeon. These dungeons are generally fairly low on the difficulty scale, and you can enter them with coin multiplying leads like Kaiki Deishu or Ganesha or New Year's Ganesha, and then you can significantly increase the efficiency at which you grind coins with. 2 stones a day with Pad Pass. I'm currently only getting 1 a day. Oh yeah, true. Pad Pass is also a thing. Yeah, Pad Pass is a big factor in free stones. So basically, for $9, I believe, you can get a stone a day. So that ends up being roughly like 30 stones a month. But I also went over the IAP options and how you can buy stones most efficiently as well. Oh, I forgot to interject that. In terms of stones that you can buy, iOS players actually have an advantage because the thing is, major retailers like Costco and some of the more tech-oriented retailers typically have 15% discounts on iOS gift cards, on App Store gift cards. So you can compound that with the efficient spending habits you can get with like bundles and such, and yeah, you can milk a lot of money with it. So Android players are at a slight disadvantage, but this is only if you prefer to buy physical cards. If you prefer to buy digital, then you're both on the same playing field. You will want to check regional pricing though, because there are cases where regional pricing may make certain bundles not as worth it as the other ones. Like for America and Canada, the 60 stone bundle is actually at a 1 cent loss compared to just buying 2 of the 30 stone bundles. So there's little things like that, but yeah, the only magic stone bundles I would consider buying are the 12, 30, and 85 stone bundles, along with the more efficient $1, $20 bundles and stuff like that. But yeah, I covered that in an early segment in the video. So as for coins, there's the Golden Mount Tricolor, there's the Weekend Dungeon, and there's also sometimes event dungeons that we get where it might just give you like a ton of coins, and if you enter them with a coin multiplying lead like Haiki Deishu, yeah, you could get a whole bunch more bang for your buck. So be on the lookout for those, and oftentimes you'll know when a certain dungeon is up based on the way people are posting on Reddit. People are going to be frequently making bragging posts about, I made like 100-something million coins with this combination, so you can do the same thing too. So just keep an eye out for those. They're generally pretty hard to miss. Weekend Dungeon, and yeah, use coin multipliers to get the maximum benefit. Do note that this benefit only works for coins that drop within the dungeon. So if there's a dungeon that gives you a bunch of coins after you clear it, like for example the March Novice Quest dungeon, like if you complete challenge 1, it says a reward of 10 million coins over here, right? But if you enter it with a coin multiplying lead, it won't matter, because the 10 million coins is a fixed reward that you get through your mail after you complete the dungeon. So in those cases it doesn't really matter, but for every other case where there's hefty gold drops within the dungeon, it helps to have that kind of a gold lead. As for the next thing, the next point of interest is magic stones. So about magic stones, these are used for rolls, stamina refreshes. Those stamina refreshes, I would recommend using video refreshes first, which reset once a day. I believe it's 7 a.m. EST, 4 a.m. PST. And then they can also be used to increase your box space, friend space. You should never use these to continue a dungeon unless the reward is absolutely worth it and you know you can clear it. Pressing continue generates a new board, and if you don't have the active skills to solve it, or an unlucky board, or an unlucky natural board and you die again, it costs more stones to keep continuing. The refreshing does give you a clean slate. So it does rid you of all your debuffs and stuff like that, but then again, you're using $1 to burn it, so make sure that it's worth it. In most cases, I will say that it's not worth it, especially if you have a team that should be able to clear it. Because generally, stoning for stamina refresh and then running the dungeon multiple times for at least one clear is generally the better, more efficient way of using your stones. And there's also another thing that I wanted to talk about. It's more stones wasted. Rushing does. Oh yeah, and also because a lot of the endgame dungeons that we have right now are no continues anyways. Yeah, there's a good chance that stoning is just don't stone to continue. Just pretend that it's not an option, and if you accidentally press yes, then I'm sorry. Sometimes you can get around it by just force closing the app and just disconnecting everything. There are cases where you can get out by doing that, but yeah, a lot of times once you press the yes button, it kind of locks you into a state where you have to continue even if you reconnect your internet. So just try to avoid stoning as much as possible. If you find that you're dying in a dungeon, then I would recommend you just reevaluate your team, and just work on other factors instead of just swiping to continue. You also get 1 for first time clearing of a dungeon color. One example by that I mean is usually whenever you complete one of these rectangles, you get a free stone. But that's because oftentimes these dungeon tracks have the same color. Like for example over here, like Investicave, all of these are basically like this same like tan color-ish background. But in the case of dungeons like the Novice dungeon over here, where there's 2 different colors, where the top is green and the bottom 3 are red, you will get 2 stones for clearing this. So if you clear a single color type of these dungeons, you will get a stone for each of them. You know what's really funny to me? Roommate from Mystics Inspector is getting a buff. Yeah. I'm honestly excited to see the buff. I do have 2 Ryumeis that I want to build around just to experiment with, but the amount of flexibility that it gets with the buffs is definitely a nice welcome to have. I mean, it is the most neglected of the 3, to be honest. So I'm glad that it's getting a little bit more attention, even though this is kind of just throwing it over the edge in terms of balance. But you know, with today's power creep and even with that buff, it's still not powerful enough to overtake Sena, so whatever, you know. As for you get one for first time clearing of a dungeon color. Yeah, this is probably the most notable example of it. You won't see too many of these, to be honest. There are cases where this can change as well. Like, for example, if there is... Yeah, I'm not sure if these ones give 2 different types as well. But yeah, it's just generally assume that every rectangle that you clear is basically 1 free extra stone, and anything else you get on top of that is extra. It's basically a bonus. So you can also buy them in forms of bundles, pad pass, or just packs, and I went over those options in an earlier section, which I'll have timestamped later on. And as for the next section, here it is. So pluses. They do not. Yeah, I think for the expert dungeon, you only get 1 for clearing the whole thing. So for pluses, they're extremely valuable, and they're also the main currency for trading. Trading is going to be the next and last section that I cover. So these pluses are basically used for boosting your units. We call them plus 297ing because you end up putting 99 of each plus into each stat to give them the maximum benefit. The way that you farm it is basically running plus point cave. Super plus points cave. This is the more efficient version of plus point cave. Plus point cave is available at any time, but super plus point cave is a limited time dungeon. You want to run this. Or there's also cases where we get events where there's a solo dungeon that comes up, and during these solo dungeons, for every clear, you might get like 100 pluses. And if you have an efficient farming team for that, then that is the most efficient pluses over time. For super plus point cave and plus point cave, you're gonna want to run these in co-op with a friend, or find someone to run it with you in Pad Discord or something like that. And in that case, exclamation mark uptime. The stream has been going on for 3 hours and 20 minutes. My throat is dying. So yeah, those are the main sources of farming pluses. Super points plus points cave comes rather frequently actually. Plus point cave is just available anytime. I would not recommend running this. Wait for super plus point caves, or wait for the events where we have the solo dungeons where you can just grind pluses nonstop. Because because those solo dungeons are typically available for the entire duration of the event, so you don't have to build your schedule around making it for these 1 hour limited time dungeons. I found those to be too much of a hassle. Especially if you're living in like the European region and you're trying to play in NA. Yeah, it can be on during some unruly times. So I would recommend you wait. And another source of pluses is through quests as well. You do get a decent chunk of it every month. And you also get some pluses for playing Pad Pass as well. The biggest, most important, and first and foremost tip for new players should be to start a second account immediately and play 2-player co-op with yourself. Yeah. That is unfortunately the state of that the game is on right now. Yeah, Blue Cross is right in the fact that it really helps to have an alt. It doesn't necessarily have to be just for co-oping with yourself, because there's a lot of freebies that we get from the mail and stuff like that as well. It can help to trade away the lesser useful things for the more useful things on your main account. To basically snowball your lead. And your alt can also act as a storage for monsters that you don't always use that are tradable. Like, this is sometimes the case for farmable monsters. And in those cases, it might help to have an alt if you want to save some box space, or if you just want to have a little bit more of an organized space, and maybe you just don't want to sell it off by accident. Though it's really up to you. But yeah, having an alt is pretty useful. I might make another video on having an alt and its benefits and how to use it effectively at another time, because I could probably rant it like for another hour or so about it. But Blue Cross is right. Do invest in an alt if possible. And when you make an alt, make sure that it's not on the same device. Like the way that I like this quote unquote alt that I have. This is my alt, but the alt that I was demonstrating with earlier is another profile on my phone. But I can't really co-op with it because I'd have to switch profiles, but that's not really effective. So my main alt that I keep is on my iPad. It's on a separate device. I believe if you don't care too much about effective puzzling, you can also have it on BlueStacks, though I'm not sure if BlueStacks in its current version supports pad. Because like every patch that comes out, it seems like it breaks, whether it's a new BlueStacks patch or a new pad patch. So it's unreliable, but if you don't have another separate device that you can play with, having another account on PC might be worth it. 2-player co-op is busted, yep. Even if you don't plan on intending on running the full dungeon by yourself, if you do 2-player co-op and you disconnect, you get the benefit of using your badge, you get your skill boosts that your friend brought with you too, and etc. So by using 2-player disconnects, you can actually enable some teams that aren't possible before, like running transformation teams with very little skill boosts by just having your friend bring the rest as needed. So that's one way to get around stricter team building compositions. It's kind of cheaty, but it's a game mechanic that's intended, so whatever. Just, yeah, use and abuse it while you still can. As for the next point, there's monster points. Save it for bigger purchases. The sad state of monster points right now is it's this over here, this purchase monster tab. Longtime pad pass holders will have too many monster points, because a lot of the valuable units that we have in the monster points at the very bottom of the shop are out of meta. Like there was a time when Guardian of the Capital, Imperial Capital Athena was useful. Ancient Trigod Mask is definitely not worth 500,000 points. Flame Pillar, God of the Scorching Sun, Amen, was actually used for a lot of farming teams, and as equip was also used as an extra skill boost that was farmable. Granted, it was on a 7-turn cooldown. Now we have better skill boost equips on longer base turn cooldowns that offer more awakenings and stuff like that too. So a lot of these units are they've fallen out of the meta, so it's best to just hold them off for specific niche uses that you might need. One example might be Neptune Dragon. There was a case where Neptune Dragon's poison was used for, I believe it was a ranking dungeon a while back. This was significantly after Neptune Dragon fell out of meta. Nowadays, I believe people can just use what's that unit called? Yeah, there's other sources of poison that people use nowadays, but Neptune Dragon at a specific level used to be used as a way to kill off units. Yeah, with a specific amount of attack with its poison, it was the perfect amount of damage, and people used to use that a lot. But that was one scenario. Nowadays, monster points are kind of fallen out of favor. There are still some niche uses. Like, the two most important uses I could think of, well, there's 3, but 2 of them are closed Tamadras and downpiece. Closed Tamadras are if you have a card that you don't need the last couple of awakenings, maybe it makes your card go over a damage threshold. In that case, you might want to use a closed Tamadra. Or if you have one copy of a card and you used to use it in its base form, but then now you need it in its equipped form, but then its cooldown is too short because you actually skilled it up all the way to its max. In that case, you might want to use a down P to reset its skill cooldowns, to reset its skill level, but do note that this comes at a hefty price of 100,000 monster points. And the other more useful way to use MP right now is whenever there's a discount in the MP shop, there's people that just spend their MP on just buying a ton of skill delay resists. So that's another option that you could do. But for beginners, I would just say just hold on to all the monster points you can have, just in case. And yeah, it's not worth. Oh yeah, MP is not worth farming or selling. You're gonna give it from events and or pad pass if you have it. King Tans, you're gonna want to save for sealing of farmables. You can also trade King Tans for Ps in a typical 1-to-1 trade. You're gonna see a lot of traits for King Tans for Ps during events where you have to skill up, where people are interested in skilling up the boss cards. But outside of events, they're usually pretty easy to trade for, provided you have active trading friends. You can find active trading friends on the pad Discord, and I would recommend you find a lot of them. Like, after you get the bare amount of friends you need to run the dungeons you want, you should try to fill up the rest of your friend slots with people that just run generic meta leads and are active traders. That's my recommendation. And King Tans, you shouldn't really farm for them in their own individual dungeon, because you can farm them in arenas, which are which are mid-game content for most players. You should be able to get to a point where you can grind arenas after your first or second major godfests, after you build up a little bit of a pool. Especially considering right now, after you finish the tutorial and you finish all the story missions, you should have 300 stones. Please do not burn all your stones on Monogatari collab, because you cannot create a full team with just Monogatari units. There is a good chance that, like I mentioned this earlier, so you should probably only roll for a couple of the 7 stars that you want. Like, if you really want to collect a lot of the units because you're a big fan of the series, in that case, then I would suggest like maybe burning half your stones on it. But for the other half, I would highly recommend saving it for Godfests. You're definitely going to want to use that for later on. Your primary source of your best investment for stones at an early stage are going to be at Godfest, just so you can build up a small repertoire of units that you can use in various teams. Because Godfest exclusives are generally pretty flexible, and they usually fill niches that they usually fill a niche that farmable units can't fill. And a lot of the times, yeah, they can make or break teams, so it's good to set some aside for some Godfests down the line. And King Tans, you can also just farm by clearing arenas. So you'll get a good source of them naturally, so don't worry too much about them. And the next source of talking point is rainbow medals. Hold on to them. You can trade them for good units with Odysseus and Sleipnir, but those units are also kind of out of date. The main use of rainbow medals is meant for you to basically bypass the grinding section of events. Like for Kiss Shot, if instead of using like a whole bunch of your stamina on grinding medals, you can actually just exchange 5 rainbow medals for 5 event rainbow medals. That's mostly for people without time though, but if you have a ton of stamina, like especially as someone that's starting out with this game, you're gonna want to just farm up the event and just save the rainbow medals for yourself. Because rainbow medals can be used to exchange for other various units in the events tab. Odysseus is one unit. He used to be a really useful unit back in the days when resists were kind of rare, because if you had 5 Trojan horses on one team, you could basically resist every blind, jammer, and poison attack, along with giving you 2.5 extra seconds of movement time. And its cooldowns are significantly long enough so that you couldn't get them up accidentally. Like in that case, it might be worth it, but nowadays with people getting more and more super awakenings, where one awakening in their kit basically just negates the whole hazard, yeah, Odysseus spam is kind of falling out of shape, and it's kind of turning into a waste of equip slots, but it is an option. Though do note that it costs 20 rainbow medals, which can take a while to gather. Because the way that we normally get rainbow medals is through quest dungeons. And if you clear all of the expert and all of the int dungeons, you will get 1 rainbow medal each. So you'll get 2 rainbow medals. And there's also various events that whenever you clear a new dungeon, you might get a rainbow medal as a one-time bonus. So there's situations like that where you can get rainbow medals. Sleipnir in Monster Exchange. This guy is probably the one that I would trade for first and foremost. I would try to probably get 2 copies of him. But 1 copy at the start is basically enough, because the equip form of this guy is actually very useful. It's a shield and a void attribute absorb for 1 turn. A lot of the attribute absorbs that you find in the game will come paired with orb converters, but Sleipnir is one that does not. And because a lot of them come with orb converters, if the only one you have is an orb converter that converts away orbs from your main attribute, then that could be a problem, right? In that case, you can just bring Sleipnir, and then you not only have extra team HP and extra team recovery, You also get a few extra second. Also get half an extra second of move time, and you also get a shield and a void attribute of sword. Like, this guy is extremely flexible. I would recommend keeping at least one of him. I would prioritize him over getting Odysseus, and I wouldn't recommend getting Odysseus at all at this point. Yeah, and these units can also be traded for 5 rainbow black metals as well. 5 black metals, which can be converted, which can be gotten for 5 rainbow metals to 1 black metal at that ratio. So you can see how these monsters can take a long time to get, and I'll just say straight up that these monsters are not meta at all. They're mostly for collection purposes, but one card in particular, the Slight Bastet, her cooldown becomes 1. She might be useful on your light team if you need a low cooldown light card to stop your assists on, especially because she does come with 2 7Cs. It's an option, though you will likely get better cards that can replace her very quickly. And as for the next section, let me just format this a little bit. The next section is going to be Evo Mats. So about Evo Mats, most Evo Mats can be purchased with MP. That might be an option for those with too much MP. It's not really an option for those starting out because you only have 50,000 MP, and I would recommend you save them just because you don't know what's going to happen. There are collabs that also give options for you to purchase units with MP, and they typically range from costing like 100,000 to 200,000 or possibly 300 and even higher, like 75,000. In those cases, you're going to want to save for them. Oh, my battery's running out. Apparently I can't charge my phone with this. Anyways, so Evo Mats, save them, farm them when they cost 0 stamina. The rarer ones like Ancient Trigon Mask and Diamond Dragon Fruit should be used sparingly as they're not easily accessible for new players. Because you can't really farm them, you're going to want to try to get as many of them as you possibly can from events. Like the Monogatari collab actually offers you 1 for trading in 4 gold medals each. I would recommend picking 1 of each. They are one-time trades, so you can only get 1 of each anyways. So just get 2 of those, and then also make sure you get Kiss Shot for 5 rainbow medals. For 5 rainbow event medals. Sometimes bosses drop in their gem form. They stack and are used for evolutions. By drop in their gem forms, I mean like this. Where various bosses will end up dropping in their gem forms. They're primarily used in endgame evolutions. And you can trade most of these for other players so long as they're the same rarity. I'll go more into trading in the next section. And Pad Pass also gives you access to all the Evo Mat engines anytime without needing to wait, and the alternative is to trade Evo Mats with other players. Like, most players will be receptive to trading at a 1-to-1 ratio, so long as it's of a different attribute. So for example, trading like a mask for a different type of mask, like that kind of trade is okay. Doublet for doublet, etc. Try not to scam and try not to get scammed by ratios. Like for example, there's people that throw up trades for snow globes, which are 5 stars, for Tamadras, which are also 5 stars. But snow globes are worth far more than Tamadras, so please do not get baited by them, and always make sure to evaluate exactly what you need and how much it would cost for you to get that if you were to farm it normally. So and next section is gonna be about trading. So about trading, you can't trade anything with an MP value of 100. If you want to check what the value of it in MP is, you just have to try to sell it. And then you're going to get a listing over here written in blue, total monster points. Because this is worth over 100 MP, I cannot trade it with other players. But if I were to go over something like this, where I look at a latent Tamadra, void attribute absorb piercer, total monster point 1, this thing I can't trade. The only caveat is whenever I try to trade a monster with another player, the monster that I'm requesting has to be of the same rarity. It cannot be higher or lower, it has to be the exact same rarity. So this means that oftentimes you're going to see trades for similar evil material types. And there's also cases where a boss monster might not be tradable, but their gem might be. For example, if I were to sell Grado, like his monster point value is worth 99. So I can trade this with other players, and I can show you as an example. Like for example, if I try to trade, so trade with all friends. These numbers underneath the things that I want to trade for, this is my desired monster. These are rarity level 10s. So if I want to trade for one of these, then I have to throw up another trade of an equivalent rarity. You can also check by sorting by MP. That is very true. So yeah, if you want to, yeah, Paper Ninja, thank you. Yeah, so if you want to check if a monster is tradable, you can also sort by MP as well. It's on the very bottom left corner over here. And if you scroll down, you can see there's a whole bunch of things over here. Most of these are collab units, farmable collab units and stuff like that. These ones are tradable, as rare as they are. There are people that collect these actually, and they're worth a significant amount of plus points, depending on who you're asking. So yeah. And also cards like Souls Reaper, Disciple, Melissa. These kind of cards are actually used in ranking dungeons at times. In cases of cards like this, you can actually basically use them, get your score in a ranking dungeon, and then just pass them on to your friends so that they can use it too. Just make sure that you trade them off to people that you can trust so that you can get it back eventually. So they can be used. Trading can also be used to stash stuff on an alt. One way you can actually do this is to basically, if you have a bunch of really cheap units like slimes or carbuncles, you can dump a bunch of plus points onto them and then trade them for other slimes, carbuncles, or similar evil materials. Like if you have a bunch of tier 1 evolution masks or doublet rubylets and stuff like that, you can transfer plus points this way from your alt to your main account if there's an event where farming plus points is really easy. It can be a little bit of a hassle, but if you get the rhythm of it down, and especially if you have both devices in your hand, it's actually it's a pretty quick process. I've done it before. 2 people you can trust, so me and my alt, yeah, basically. So their current theme is basically make an alt so you can trade with yourself, or basically so you can use that as a storage. So yeah, because of their current theme of alts, I might actually have to make another video at another time. Like I have to end the stream in the next 20 minutes. But yeah, I might make that into a part 2 video where I can go over basically how you can manage your alt. I have to double check if BlueStack still supports pad, because every time that there's an update, it just breaks, but whatever. And that's pretty much it for what I wanted to explain. So yeah, be nice, don't scam, and also don't fall for scams. Oh, the format is broken. 1 second. So this is basically just going to be a list of common pad resources that I would suggest you look into. Let me just break this up into easily digestible parts, which you can do. Okay, so I'm gonna split this up to 2 sections. Okay, so for more information about the game, check out the following sites. So the first link, I'm gonna compile a list of these and I'm gonna stick them in the description and also in the Reddit post, which I've advertised on. So Puzzle and Dragon X, no, before that, Puzzle and Dragons US./news. So this is basically the official site. This is different from pressing news on the game, because the news on the game will take you to the Facebook site, and for a lot of people they don't want to use Facebook. So if you want to get news from the source itself, I would highly recommend checking out their official website. They do post updates on their Twitter as well, so you can use that as another source of information as well, though it will all eventually link back to the main website. So that's basically a really good source of getting information on what kind of current events are going on and what the upcoming event is going to be. Though granted, for upcoming events, they usually only announce them like a day early-ish. Sometimes a bit longer for major anniversary events and stuff like that. So yeah, but it's always good to have a refresher on what the current event has in store for you, because there's sometimes where I miss out on some things because it's not glaringly obvious. Like for example, it's if in a technical dungeon over here, like there are cases where, like in the previous event, if you could clear Ultimate Arena with various leaders, like yeah, over here, even now, conditional rewards, these kind of things aren't obvious, and it's very easy to miss them. So if you don't want to miss them, I would highly recommend checking out the news. There's also Pat's subreddit, so make sure you search by Google before you ask a question, or look for a team building mega thread. Yeah, the reason for this is because Reddit search is kind of butt. So the better way to search for content on Reddit is to basically use Google's own search engine. So one common way is to do, I believe one of the search queries is like from : reddit.com/r/puzzle and dragons. And then if you put in your queries afterwards, that is basically the better search way. Yeah. And because with Google you also have the ability to sort by time in a more specific time frame and stuff like that too. Yeah, just use Google. I would recommend the PatDB app for Android. I found it and it's really amazing. Yeah, there are various pad apps out there that can also help you out as well. Do be wary that it's possible that it might get copyright striked and it might just get removed from the face of the earth. That has happened before, and it has turned off a lot of people from playing this game. So just be wary before you get too committed to an app, because it might just go away. It's the sad reality of it. So yeah, use the Pat subreddit. Make sure you use Google search. If you're looking for a specific card help though, it might help to just like, if you're doing one word searches on Reddit, it's not that bad. It's just that when your query turns into multiple words or a phrase, that's when it gets really hairy. So patproduct.site, made by Blogging Mama and written by Rennie. Huge thanks to her. The team at Blogging Mama basically translates all the JP news that are happening like almost live. So it everything basically gets translated on the day of or the day after. So this is a very good way to basically keep track of Japanese news, because most of the content that happens over there trickles down to us in a 2 to 3 month delay. And the only thing that might not make it over to us is basically collabs outside of the pad universe. So we get all the seasonal stuff on time. So like Halloween, Christmas, back to school, beach, summer ram, stuff like that. We get those. Those are guaranteed to make it over to us. It's just that Disney collabs, and some very Japanese specific franchise collabs, those ones might not make it over. Though it does help if you were to save stones for it, because we have a little bit of a glimpse into the future. This way we can also tell if rams are worth rolling in or not, because we can tell if something is going to be meta changing or not. And oftentimes, because the highest tier rarity is like it drops at a 2% rate, and if you want to have a decent chance at getting it, then you're going to want to get you want to save up enough stones to basically roll 50 or more times. Yeah, it really helps for us to get like this a little glimpse into the future. Though if you play on a Japanese server, then you get to play with the newest toys, so you have that going for you, and you also get more event rewards faster. So there's trade-offs between playing in Japan or playing on the other accounts, but I personally I'm a fairly casual player, honestly, so I just stick to playing on NA so I can have 2 to 3 months of prep time. I'm not really too focused on the bleeding edge of Puzzle and Dragons team building. Another resource is puzzledragonx.com. puzzledragonx.com used to be maintained a lot more actively in the past, though it still is for a lot of card descriptions. Um, yeah, some of the dungeon details might not be updated, especially for the newer dungeons, but I believe that's because most of the staff doesn't really play this game anymore, but I could be wrong about that. There was a period where the website was basically abandoned, but now it's not. So I am hopeful for its continual support and continuation. Though there are other databases, puzzleanddragons.com is very easy to use. One recommendation, if you're using the site, even if you're on mobile, use the desktop site. Trust me. The mobile site is kind of jank. So force into desktop mode and you'll have a pretty good time. The only other thing that I would warn you about using puzzledragonx.com is if you were to use it to look up a dungeon guide on a longer dungeon like an arena, there is a good chance that it might lag up your phone or your device because of the way that the website is well, not optimized, but unoptimized, I guess. No, unoptimized makes it sound like it's intentional, but it's, yeah, it's not intentional. It's just that it's built on kind of like an old code base, so it looks kind of, yeah, it's really inefficient with the way that it loads its sprites and stuff. So it's gonna come with a heavy resource cost. So just be wary of that before you bring it up on your old phone. It might crash. It might crash, or it might not load properly, or you might slog through it slowly. So just be wary of that. But for the shorter dungeons with like 7 or 10 floors, it's fine. It's only really a concern when there's like 20 floors or above. That's why endless corridors, the ones with like 30 or more floors, those ones are split up into 10, like 5 different sections. For your viewing convenience. Not for your viewing convenience, for your device's convenience. So for the next batch of sites, Illumina.com and Illumina's advanced search. I'm not sure if the website still works because I tried using it. Illumina. Is it working? Okay, so it's back. Yay. Okay, so yeah, this website is incredibly handy. Puzzle Dragon X is a website that I would use if you know what a certain card is and you just want details on it. But if you want to look for a card based on its attributes, like what kind of active skill, leader skill, or something like that is, and you want to narrow down your options and to basically see if you have maybe you need to have a card that fills a certain niche, but it turns out that that card is basically an evolution of a card that you already have, but you might not know that because the active skill is so vastly different from what it was before. And in those cases, using Illumina.com might open up some new options for you because, yeah, because you can narrow down your search really hard. So you can search by a combination of awakenings that you might want. You can search it by what kind of an active you might need, what kind of actives you need, and that what kind of active combinations you need. Its maximum, minimum cooldown, stuff like that. You can really narrow down your search. I would highly recommend getting comfortable with using this site. It is very, very, very useful for team building. As for like team building and for missing out and for filling out like little gaps in your team that you might not be aware of. As for paddonglare.com, Pad Dongler is basically like a board simulation. It is highly configurable, so you can actually use it to simulate 7x6 boards as well, and possibly larger ones as well. I think it's it's very configurable. You can set like matching times on it. You can simulate board solves on it. You can share board patterns on it too. So I would recommend using this to, like, if you're in a sticky situation, I would recommend using this to practice out some board solves. I would not recommend using board solvers because while they solve boards in the shortest possible route, it's very unorganic and the solve is going to be different from you playing normally. The shortest possible route isn't necessarily the best one either because there are times when many simple brute force motions can be easier than a short but windy path due to solver using cascades, which you might not realize you messed up until the end. So yeah, don't use solvers. Just get better at solving normally. There's plenty of orb matching guides out there. I'm unfortunately short on time, so I can't really demonstrate some of it myself. Though if it is a point of interest, if you would like to hear how I solve boards, whether it be 6x5s or 7x6s, please let me know down in the comments, and then I'll get around to making a lesson plan for that too, even though it's going to be way shorter than this because this video is almost 4 hours long. So another website is GitHub, Mapaler for pad dash formation. Yeah, this pad dash formation, you might see it on various other YouTube videos where people show off their team builds. Pad dash formation is also very configurable. It's used for testing out, well, not really testing out, but for building and showing off various team compositions. It can show like how many skill boosts it has, what its maximum HP is, what its effective HP is with its leader skills. It gives you a very thorough overview of your team, and especially if you're looking for help with little slight adjustments for your team, I would highly recommend you get comfortable with this so that anyone that tries to help you can get a better look at basically what you're working with at the moment. So yeah, feel free to try out all these. I'll try to link all the resources that I found out that I've linked over here, and possibly anything else that I might run across. The pad damage chart that I found, I will also link it with a source. I believe Feather was the one that posted it, but I'm not too sure, so I'm just gonna stay silent on that one. But yeah, I'll definitely be updating all the descriptions, including the one in the video, with the handy list of websites that I linked at the very end, along with the damage chart, so you can understand how your damage works. And yeah, so it's been 3 hours and 54 minutes. Jeez, this went on for a lot longer than I expected it to. So if you have any other questions that you think are important that should be answered, feel free to let me know down in the comments, and I'll try to get to it in another part for a video. I do plan on making a part 2 for this video if I do get enough comments. But because of the fact that I'm thinking of making a video for the purposes of making an alt and how to use one, along with maybe a basic how to solve boards kind of guide and how I do it, those 2 topics are honestly enough to last a few hours. Okay, maybe not a few hours, but like 1 hour. So if you have any other questions that you'd like answered at the end of that video, then please let me know. Or if there's any topics that you think are very important that I missed out on, then please let me know. So just as an overview, I'm just gonna bring up the 10 topics that I covered earlier. Oh, yeah, I think this is the first time I've been talking for 4 hours straight. My throat is dying. So thank you all for dropping by, and I hope you have a wonderful evening. So I'll be signing out for tonight, Lab Rats, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye. Da, 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 da.